Reborn in the empire where the sun never sets to become a pirate. Hey, fanfic family. So glad to see you here again to continue this incredible adventure. As always, kindly remember, this story is 100% fiction, so don't go looking for dimensional portals in your closet. All rights to this fantastic novel belong to the original author. We're just your humble narrators of epic tales. Are you enjoying the fanfic? Show it by subscribing to our YouTube channel and dropping us a like. And if you're impatient for more exclusive content, our Patreon is your happy place. Chapter 51. Look at this mess. Cannons roared, water splashed. A fierce chase unfolded across the vast expanse of the Cantabrian Sea, west of the French Isle of Kur. On one side was the brigantine-class gunboat, renowned for its speed and stability, a favorite of pirates and smugglers. On the other was the Galen-class destroyer, a key anti-smuggling force in the colonial navies of various nations. It was a cat-and-mouse game, a cheetah and an antelope. However one described the relationship, the destroyer, armed with long-range 18-pound guns and offering an overwhelming advantage in both attack and defense, was always the brigantine's least favorite opponent. The sight of a destroyer chasing the brigantine across the vast ocean was not uncommon. But this chase was different. The Reindeer sailed straight ahead, bow held high. The brigantine, who should have been fleeing, zigzagged along her flank like a nimble mouse, sometimes approaching, sometimes retreating, repeatedly unleashing its 9-pound claws. Even when it couldn't break its foe's skin, it continued its relentless pursuit, a tiresome pursuit. Turn, Lorraine roared, his steering wheel spinning to the floor. The slender hull of the patchy flower veered outward, tilting dramatically to create distance. The sailors on deck desperately grasped anything they could hold on to, while the broadside gun seized the opportunity to fire continuously, engaging the Reindeer. Shells flew, and dozens of massive splashes shattered the calm sea. Since his last lucky ignition of the Reindeer's sternsail, Atring had fired 3 times, his best result being a blackened section of the Reindeer's hull. 9-pound solid shells could barely chip a warship's hull at close range, while 6-pound shotgun shells, besides being dirty, posed little threat to the hard, tough wood core. The Reindeer's broadsides were different. 18-pounder guns, in a direct hit, could easily shred the patchy flower's hull. Even the 12-pounder guns on the main deck could inflict significant damage. Like a mantis raising its arms, its eggs swooping down upon a rock, Lorraine constantly changed direction, both to angle his shells onto the Reindeer's deck and to avoid irreparable damage. His steering was impeccable, but his erratic movements were certainly not friendly to the gunners tasked with such a heavy responsibility. Atring angrily unfastened the restraints around his waist and, holding onto the railing, wobbled his way to Lorraine's side. Captain. Admiral. President. Boss. British kid, he used all the words he could think of to describe Lorraine, in order to express the resentment and dissatisfaction in his heart. What is your purpose in rushing over to seek death? To prove that you are brave and have excellent skills, Lorraine gritted his teeth and turned back the steering wheel, and cursed in Chinese. If you have something to say it quickly. If you have to fart quickly. Huh? Atring was stunned for a moment. Don't chant spells at me. Lorraine steadied the rudder and took a breath. I asked you to fart at me. Bah. I asked you to speak your mind directly. Don't beat around the bush. I want a distance of 60 to 80 meters. I want an inclination of at least 10 degrees, maybe 15 degrees. It also needs to be stable for 15 to 20 seconds, no shaking. Are you crazy? Lorraine widened his eyes. Do you know what this shot means? I'm going to have all the shotgun decks replaced with buckshot. Lorraine was stunned. Are you still planning to keep pace? 5 minutes at most, and your big talk will be over. Atring steadied himself on the railing, spitting at Lorraine. The cat's tail is right ahead, and the deck is littered with debris. Even if Mr. Ramos Pitic had your steering skills, no one on deck would survive 2 turns. Lorraine pushed the wheel to the floor. You win. In 3 minutes, you'll have it all. With his promise, Atring scrambled to the gun deck. Shotgun, broadside shotgun. Boys, aim for their gun ports, only their gun ports, nothing else. The Panther had abandoned its tack. With the wind at its back, the Panther, under full sail, was nearly 50% faster than the Reindeer, which had lost its only stern sail. Once it abandoned its tack, its speed increased dramatically. Its smoky bow tore through the wind and waves, closing and overtaking with visible force, exposing its entire broadside to the Reindeer's gun ports. The Reindeer fired repeatedly. Amidst the turbulent waves, only one shell struck the stern. With a resounding bang, It smashed into Kren's workshop, ripping a gaping hole in the stern and sending wood flying. But the Iris still managed to outmaneuver. The shattered stern extended beyond the bow. Across the sea, Lorraine, standing at the helm, stared at Viren, standing at the bow. Lorraine sneered and raised his middle finger. Lower the square sail. Turn. The sailman ripped the halyard from the foremast. The massive square sail crashed down, sending the Iris plummeting in speed, and with it, the entire ship lurched to the starboard. A massive list of nearly 20 degrees. The Iris's waterline was completely exposed in front of the Reindeer's gun ports. The sailors, unable to secure themselves, screamed and tumbled. Hannah, on the lookout, clutched the halyards, pursed her lips, and stared at the sky. The long-awaited gunners opened fire. A barrage of shrapnel shot out from the 5 gun ports on the side, clattering against the Reindeer's hull. Specks of light streamed through the gaping gun ports, and faint screams echoed from the Reindeer's gun deck as at least 7 heavy guns misfired. The destroyer's broadside boasted 16 guns. With most of those on the gun deck misfiring, the 12-pounders on the main deck opened fire one after another. Boom, boom, boom. At least 3 of the shells struck the patchy Flower's hull, the solid shells raking deep dents in the wood. One of the shells struck directly, blasting a massive hole through the hull and shattering the fresh water stored in the watertight compartments. Smoke filled the air, and the ship shook violently. After the tremor, the ship leveled, and Atron finally had his chance. He lowered his torch, lit the rigging, and with all his might, shouted, "Give me a sun, Miss Rennie!" On the main deck, 4 6-pounders fired almost simultaneously, sending a hail of shrapnel soaring high, over the Reindeer's towering broadside, showering the deck with blood. A perfect shot. Aboard the Reindeer, wails filled the air, and Lorraine saw Velen's sullen face. Velen was furious. Lorraine laughed maniacally, his raised middle finger retracted, and with his raised throat, he slowly made a strangulation gesture. He mouthed the French words, "Qual, Bordel, look at this mess." Hannah's shout echoed across the ship in perfect time, her slightly gritty voice filled with joy. "The cat's tail is under full sail south. They've escaped. They have escaped." Lorraine clicked the starboard steering wheel, leaped from the deck, and declared, "Put out the fire. Repair the ship. I want to hear loud singing. Gentlemen, sing, when Great Britain, blessed by God, rises first from the blue ocean. Rise, 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 rise from the blue ocean. This is the favor of heaven, the care and favor of the earth. The angels of protection sing in unison. Rule, Britannia. Rule the sea, British warriors, never be slaves." The unbridled singing drifted across the sea, but the singers grew farther and farther away. The Reindeer was stained with blood, and the lookout overhead trembled as he reported, "Admiral, the English have fled, 1 ship heading west, 1 heading south." The only thing left in Velen's mind was Lorraine's playful lip movements. "Look at this mess. You're the one seeking death," he muttered, gently wiping away the first mate's blood that had splattered on his face. "You can't get away, Lorraine Arthur Drake. I swear, to the ends of the earth, the ends of the earth." P.S. Ren, French for reindeer by the way. The chapter reviews are back. Shall we celebrate? I suggest you throw me some tickets. Please feel free to do so, thank you. Chapter 52 Noah's Caravan. Climb high and gaze into the distance. As part of the Atlantic Ocean, the Celtic Sea boasts strong winds and turbulent waves. Whenever the trade winds pick up, there are often days or even dozens of days of violent storms. Just like now. Wind from the west-southwest, 7 knots, gale. Waves nearly 2 meters high are rare in coastal waters, but here, wave after wave pushed the Iris higher and higher until it could no longer bear the weight and suddenly collapsed. Lorraine stood on the high observation deck, holding a monocular, gazing at the horizon. He had been watching for at least 15 minutes, motionless, like a clay sculpture or wooden carving. The mirror showed another world. The outer wall of the tomb oil tree resembled a porthole, with black lines of varying lengths streaked across the glass. The highest line was flush with the horizon, the lowest resting against the outline of the ship's stern. In this world, the Iris was dividing the sea into 2 sharp white lines, at the end of which stood the majestic reindeer. Like the butterfly flower, she rose and fell on the waves, and between the undulations, another arrow-shaped line emerged, parallel to the previous one. Together, they resembled a missing quotation mark. This shape of wave line meant closeness, that both parties were on the same straight line, and even more so, that their relative speeds were almost identical. Chasing, but unable to catch up, shaking off, but unable to shake off, neither advancing nor falling, made Lorraine feel annoyed. Tisk. I'm not Sophie Labrador, is there any need to be so persistent? I think it's about the same. Little Pierce's indignant voice came from under his feet. He was also in the lookout, or more accurately, this was his post, and Lorraine was holding his monocular. Little Pierce was cracking his fleshy fingers. Brother, you and Ms. Labrador both chose to be with a romantic Mr. Dessex and abandoned the hot-tempered Mr. Dessex. And before you did, you both humiliated him. She crushed his heart, and you blew up his boat. Aside from your gender, there's nothing different. How could you have learned so many strange words at such a young age? Lorraine rolled her eyes in anger. She reached out and grabbed his chubby face, lifting him over the edge of the platform. Look. Me? Blowing up his boat. From the 20-meter-high observation deck, the Papilio was a horrific sight. The gaping hole in the bow was a startling sight, its crack like a tortoiseshell spider web, stained with traces of smoke and fire. The stern might appear unscathed from the deck, but from above, another noticeable gap, just to the left, marred the otherwise smooth shape. It was like a perfect shortbread nibbled by a child, leaving crumbs and slivers of it. But that wasn't the real problem. In order to allow Acheron to fire that fateful shot, the Papillion's hull suffered irreparable damage. 2 watertight compartments on the port side had their bulkheads shattered, rendering them completely useless as water poured in. Considering the need for the ship to maintain balance at high speed, Kren was forced to manually fill the 2 corresponding watertight compartments on the starboard side, removing the plugs in a symmetrical pattern. Nearly 100 tons of water suddenly poured into the hold, lowering the Papillion's waterline by a full 1.5 meters, practically turning it into a giant turtle lying on the surface. The upside was that the Papillion remained as steady as a dog in the Celtic Sea's swells. The downside was that even if Lorraine had saved all the sails, the Papillion's peak speed would have dropped to less than 8 knots. They had been forced to abandon everything they could, including ballast pebbles, sandbags, and the expensive spices brought from Spain. Coincidentally, the Reindeer, without its stern sail and some of its crew, also couldn't reach 8 knots. The 2 sides pursued the fugitive at nearly equal speeds, heading in the same direction. The chase had lasted 2 days and 1 night, a full 30 hours. Lorraine was practically driven crazy by Velen's pursuit. To maintain adequate stamina and reflexes, the ship's sailors had begun rotating in 2 6-hour shifts since last night. The crew also had to take turns. However, Lorraine's expectations of the flagship's crew were too high, and they generally had to handle multiple duties. This situation made their lack of manpower more apparent. At the helm were Lorraine, Henna, and Acheron, handling the sails were Lorraine, Acheron, and Kren, and lookouts were Lorraine, Henna, and Pierce. Kren also had to ensure the sealing of the 4 flooded tanks. Noah, however, was solely responsible for soothing the crew, greeting and seeing off guests from morning till night. The repetitive phrase, "Congratulations, you've drawn the best lottery," had practically worn her out. Lorraine, on the other hand, managed 3 shifts. In those 30 hours, he'd slept less than 2 hours, leaving his young chin stubbled and his temper naturally volatile. Just now, he'd even had the urge to turn around and fight Velen to the death. The outcome was predetermined anyway, it was either me or you. He needed some sense. After playing rough with Pierce's face, Lorraine took a deep breath of the salty sea breeze, grabbed the cable, and leaped down, landing right in front of Hina's wheel. Hina, clinging to the wheel, glanced at him, saying nothing. She simply extended a slender finger at the railing, meaning something between get down and find Noah. Lorraine gazed at the endless, sailless sea and scratched his hair irritably. "I don't want to draw lots, it would make me feel even more foolish." "You're different," Hina said. "The Roma wander the world, skilled in many ways to soothe their emotions, not just divination, really." Half believing, Lorraine descended to Noah's divination room. Several sailors were engaged in divination. Daylight streamed through the portholes, illuminating the crystal ball of fate and casting a hazy violet shimmer across the cabin, a scene of breathtaking beauty and enchantment. Noah wore a floral gown, her face veiled in sheer gold veil. The dress had peculiarly narrow sleeves, gathered at the elbows, loosened at the top and shimmering at the bottom, revealing her snow-white arms as she waved them. As always, she left the tarot untouched. With a sweep of her sleeve, a flick of the veil, the silver tarot card swirled and opened like a spirit, forming a stack and fanning out. As the sailors were stunned by this dazzling display, She reached out and tapped the cards. The first card revealed a fool. "Fate has answered you," she said, her voice slightly hoarse, tinged with laughter. "Now, with your doubts, draw." The result was naturally auspicious, for those on board were now preoccupied only with the future. Life or death. Life was the best, fulfilled for the living. Death was a deception, a wrong for the dead. However, Noah was shy but not afraid of ghosts. Since the fortune teller was dead, what else was there to say? Lorraine watched the entire process from the cabin door. Seeing the sailor's bright, confident eyes, he couldn't help but smile. Henna was right. The Roma people were adept at many soothing methods. Divination might be the most widely spread of them, but it was far from the most mysterious. Hearing Lorraine's chuckle, White Ear, who was lying in the corner, meowed and flew out. Lorraine grabbed its neck mid-air, brought it to him, and pursed his lips. "Little guy, the fishing ban has been lifted. I saw Kren fishing overboard. Don't miss your chance." Meow. White Ear disappeared with a swish. Noah blushed and welcomed Lorraine into the cabin. He closed the door and whispered, "Captain, are you here for a fortune teller too?" Lorraine shrugged regretfully and plopped down in White Ear's place, stroking the smooth surface of fate. "The wind's steady, no need to trim the sails." Pierce and Henna were so distracted by my annoyance, they just, well, soft fingers touched his scalp. Noah had unknowingly moved behind Lorraine, kneeling down and cradling his head, letting him rest against her chest. She pressed her fingertips against his scalp, gently, softly, like magic, drawing out the strands of thought from his mind, which then emanated into the void, disappearing. Lorraine breathed a sigh of relief. "Is this a secret Romani art?" "It's the care Romani women only show their families." Noah lowered her head, gazing at the small, pure white woven square on the carpet that perfectly encircled herself and Lorraine. In a whisper, she said, "Welcome to my caravan, Captain. P.S. The Celtic Sea is part of the Atlantic Ocean." It's worth noting that this sea originally had no name until Holt named it in 1921. For the sake of clarity, this article uses this name earlier. Please forgive me. PS2. As a nomadic people, the Roma are extremely attached to the concept of home. Their home includes residence and family. Traditionally, a family of 3 or 4 Roma would return to the caravan at night, hug each other and sleep without being disturbed by outsiders. Until now, many Roma have moved into brick and stone houses, but they still mark out a 3 to 4 square meter white square in a corner of the bedroom carpet and sleep in each other's arms like their ancestors. This square is their caravan, which is both private and sacred to them. PS3. Watertight compartment. In fact, Europe did not have a mature concept of watertight compartments in the era of wooden sailing ships. The watertight compartment in this article refers to the lower cargo hold that has been waterproofed on the hull and deck. For the convenience of description and understanding, the term watertight compartment is used. Chapter 53, When Things Get Bad. Under Noah's gentle pressure, Lorraine felt like he had entered a peaceful harbor. Half asleep and half awake, he suddenly heard someone banging on the cabin door. Boom, boom, boom. Noah jumped away like a frightened white deer. Lorraine suddenly lost his support and slammed his hands on the heavy woven carpet. Although it didn't hurt, he was scared. He got up with a grin, gave Noah an apologetic smile, opened the cabin door, and saw Pierce. "What's wrong, brother?" "There is a large fog area at 10 o'clock, about 15 kilometers away. We may pass through it from the side." Fog area, a very strange word. Lorraine frowned and looked at the sky. The weather was fine. The high waves at sea were caused by the trade winds, not by the rain or thunder. How could we possibly encounter fog in this situation? "Send Hina around." At this time, Captain, Lorraine hadn't finished his order when Kren, looking frantic, ran over, his white ears clinging to his head, refusing to be pulled away. "Captain, the hold is leaking. We've been filling it for too long, and the glue sealing the panels is starting to peel. There's virtually no chance of recovery. The hold is leaking." Lorraine's face paled. 1, or 3, the Pansy had 6 watertight compartments on each side, plus the bow and stern, for a total of 14. 4 of them had already filled, pushing the ship's draft to its limit. If 3 more, no. 4. The ship would definitely sink. Lorraine took a deep breath, his mind, finally clear, racing once more. Sinking was the worst-case scenario, but the hold itself was intact, and with enough sailors on board to remove the water, the chances of a direct sinking were minimal. But the flooding of 3 compartments would undoubtedly slow the pansy even further. It wouldn't be long before the reindeer would catch up. On the vast ocean, they had no chance of escape. Their only chance of survival. Lorraine gritted her teeth. "I'll take the helm. Kren will man the sails. Pierce and Noah will direct the sailors to drain the water. Have Henna go up to the lookout immediately. And Acheron, get him up. Captain, are you going to?" We enter the fog, into the fog. The distance was 15 kilometers, and at the pansy's current speed, it would only take an hour. Even accounting for the speed loss from wind and leaks, the entire process wouldn't take more than an hour and a half. Lorraine, surrounded by the others, ascended to the helm and took the handwheel from Henna. Their eyes met, their lips pursed, and they nodded solemnly. "Full rudder to port, half square sail, cut to wind," Lorraine shouted to the sailors on deck. The Papilio, target, fog. As the chase and the retreat continued, the Papilio's speed gradually decreased. The reindeer, coming from behind and flank, was now rapidly pursuing Lorraine's starboard rear. This was the news reported by Henna from the lookout. Judging from the reindeer's response, Velen had clearly also noticed the fog and had seen through Lorraine's intentions. Fortunately, or unfortunately, the fog wasn't at 12 o'clock, but at 10 o'clock. With a nearly 30-degree cut angle, the fully square-rigged reindeer couldn't cut a wind as nimbly as the Papilio. Without the massive aft sail, she could only fold her line repeatedly to maintain her pursuit speed. This undoubtedly increased the distance the reindeer had to travel, and despite the enemy's speed, she barely managed to maintain speed parity. The Papilio's deck was in chaos. The wind was high, the waves were rough, and in an unstable, sheer-like environment, the sailors stood in long rows on the deck, each with a rope tied around his waist to stabilize him. They brought buckets of water up from the hold, poured them into the sea, and passed the buckets back, repeating the process over and over again, completing a circle. They raced against time, speed, load, and wind. Everything needed to be seized with their own hands, and every tiny advantage was used to offset their increasingly obvious disadvantage. The fog area was in sight. As soon as the fog area was sighted, a cry of surprise rose from the deck. Destroyer, the reindeer's massive body suddenly leaped out of the horizon, smashing through the waves with a loud bang, and rushed towards the side of the butterfly flower from 2 kilometers away. "Acheron! Bomb her sails!" Lorraine roared, and suddenly turned the rudder. Acheron gained elevation, and the long-awaited 6-pounder and the reindeer's bow gun were fired simultaneously. Boom, 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 boom. Huge sprays of water shot up into the sky, blooming on either side of both ships. Salty seawater pelted Lorraine's face, and he wiped his face and steered back on course. 1.7 from the fog, 1.3 from the reindeer. "Lorraine, she'll intercept us," Henna shouted from the lookout. "She can't," Lorraine's face grimaced. "Full sail, tack. Acheron, get to the stern gun." Kren personally went to hoist the sails, and Acheron scrambled into the stern cabin. The square sail was hoisted once more, and Lorraine, cutting into the wind, steered the bow back into the windward direction. With a sudden leap, the ship was back in line with the reindeer. The distance between them was now less than a kilometer, a distance that, on the vast sea, was practically equivalent to collision. The reindeer's bow gun roared again, and one of its rounds pierced the hull, sending up a cloud of debris. The Papillion rose against the waves, its bow high, and then, it crashed. "Acheron, Sophie Labrid, blessed me," boom. The heir's stern was met with a single cannon shot. Acheron fired a chain shell, then abandoned the gun and leaned over the porthole to watch. The round iron shell arced high in the air, unfurling into a chain, 2 hemispheres, like stretched dumbbells, flying over the reindeer's head, catching the dense rigging of the bow. It spun around and around the rigging, the red-hot chain slicing through 2 cables in a split second. Snap! Snap! Acheron knew he was hallucinating, but he heard the singing. The reindeer's bowsprit fell, the massive topsail instantly losing its weight and sagging to half sail. Vive la! Amidst Acheron's cheers, the reindeer slammed down as if it had hit the brakes. Before it could even right itself, the battered Papillon had returned to the tangent line, lurching and swaying, then plunged headfirst into the thick fog that hovered like a monster over the sea, vanishing in a flash. Velen stared blankly at the vanishing ship. "I failed," the navigator beside him reminded in panic. "Admiral, this position in Ireland and Iceland are exactly the 3 fulcrums of an equilateral triangle. According to the ancient navigator's legend, I've heard of that legend, Velen interrupted the navigator coldly. The Viscount gave the sailor's mirror as a gift to every admiral of the Chamber of Commerce. Although it is an old nautical chart of little value, I have also been fortunate to read it, since you know. Are you scared? Velen stared at the navigator with a murderous look in his eyes. It's just a strange fog area and reefs. The barbaric English pirates dared to enter, but we, glorious French gentlemen, will be caught in the bridle of the ancient sphere. The navigator swallowed hard. If the admiral has an order, return to the ship. Huh? Give the order, return home. Velen dusted off the front of his blood-stained windbreaker. As far as I know, in the past 100 years, no less than 5 adventurers have tried to explore the Hubexy Mist Island. However, the small boats could not enter and the large ships could not leave. The stupid English pirates rushed into the fog area in brigantine this time, which is tantamount to death, he sneered. Our time is honorable and precious. The prey in Cantabria is far more valuable than these dead people. P.S. Vive la equals French, long live. I don't know if it can be used like this. Spread my hands. Chapter 54 Ghost Ship. Thick fog. The milky white fog stretched endlessly, reducing visibility to less than 5 meters. For a ship 30 meters long and 8 meters wide, that distance was practically impossible. Lorraine felt as if she had entered a cloud, with nothing but fog before her eyes. Where were they? How far had they traveled? Which way was they heading? His once precise sense of direction and distance had completely failed him, and even his sense of smell was fading under the faint, almost imperceptible smell of sulfur. Lorraine could only rely on his compass, which told him they were drifting south. Entering the fog, the ship drifted southward involuntarily. The turbulent current was so stubborn and unyielding that it threatened to capsize the entire ship if the rudder wasn't adjusted. The wind here was strange. The Pansy was clearly on the edge of the trade wind belt, yet the wind here seemed scattered and erratic. The brigantine's superior wind-catching ability became a flaw, causing the ship to sway from side to side, restless and uneasy. Lorraine had no choice but to lower all the sails. Of the 4, the square, fore aft, tack, and bowsprit, only one remained. He attached a boom, and Crone himself manned the sail, manually catching the wind. The Pansy was propelled almost solely by the current. Even so, Lorraine felt the ship was going too fast. He decided to take a risk and request a temporary halt to draining the leaking tanks. He had his crew paint red and blue lines on the cabin murals, keeping the tanks nearly half full. Starting from the blue line, they would never allow the water level to reach the red line. This meant the Pansy was flooded with 140 to 160 tons of water, easily enough to reach through the gun ports. The danger of sinking was obvious, and the crew began to pray. Lorraine had no faith to turn to. The faith of his previous life hadn't yet been born. The faith of this life lay beneath the sea, ready to welcome every sailor to drown in the hospitable Nudung. It wasn't crazy to chat with Nild now. Heaven moves with vigor, a gentleman strives for self-improvement. Perhaps it was because self-preservation sharpens one's mind. Lorraine suddenly had a brilliant idea. He acted immediately, having the sailors tie Acheron, a sea-savvy and skilled helmsman, to the bowsprit, creating a makeshift humanoid figurehead. Acheron, trembling, reluctantly served as the eyes and mouth of the Papilio. 20 sailors formed a long line from forecastle to poop, linking him, Kren, and Lorraine. Only then did the fear of walking on a frying pan and a millstone gradually dissipate from the sailors' hearts. It was only a matter of time before they emerged from the fog. As long as the compass remained intact, they would never become wanderers on the sea. Ghost ship, Acheron suddenly screamed shrilly. Full left. Full left. Lorraine, without a second thought, threw the steering wheel to the floor. The Iris slowly turned, barely 15 degrees, when a silent silhouette tore through the dense fog, gently bumping against the Iris's broadside, then sliding away with a mere bump. The two ships brushed side by side, hulls rubbing against each other, making a sharp, rattling sound. Lorraine suddenly had an idea. Cast a line. Bored, with that, he locked the steering wheel, picked up the cable from the side, and leaped over. Crack! The half-rotty deck cracked with a series of crackling noises. Lorraine bent over, hands stretched out, afraid to move, fearing that a sudden movement would cause the deck to collapse. But the sailors remained silent. As the two ships neared the end of the collision, Henna glided down from the observation deck, carrying Noah overboard. Pierce and Kren also abandoned their tasks, casting out cables and hooks to grab the planks. The sailors, waking from their dream, wound and tied the ropes, finally tying the two ships together. Lorraine breathed a sigh of relief, tossed the rope to Hannah, and whispered, "Tie the mainmast, but don't tie it too tight." After nearly half an hour of work, the two ships were finally securely fastened together. Lorraine tried to move, the oak planks held up, but he needed to be careful, especially with the seams and joints. It was a two-masted caravel, about 20 meters long and 6 meters wide. Its fore and aft Latin sails distinguished it from other multi-masted ships. Historically, the caravel was a great Portuguese design, popular worldwide with the rise of Portuguese maritime power, but also gradually fading as the small nation fell into second-class status. Ever since the galleon replaced the caravel as the preferred ocean-going vessel, these agile, stable, but lacking in explosive power, multi-masted sails have become rare on the seas. Like the one Lorraine was standing on. The rotting black planks, the shredded canvas, the rusted small-caliber guns on the gun deck, and the scattered, pale, hopeless remains all told Lorraine that the ship was a century, perhaps even centuries old. Naturally, no life was to be seen aboard. Not a living soul, not a ghost. Only the relentless crackling of tiny, delicate pieces of debris punctured the ship's lifespan, heralding its end. The ship was unusable. Its decay extended far beyond the exterior, even crucial elements like the core and keel had not escaped the ravages of time. Lorraine's plans to repair the ship with locally available materials were dashed, and he could only continue deeper, intent on exploring the coffin. He first descended to the lower hold with Hannah and Noah, pried open the lower deck, and saw the dark pebbles of ballast. This proved the ship wasn't a pirate ship, as pirates often used looted gold and silver as ballast. Pirates who could afford such a large ship centuries ago would have undoubtedly possessed considerable wealth. They then entered the stern, examining the cabins from bottom to top. Most of the items in the cabin had decayed, having spent their days and nights with their skeletal owners. Only a few remained intact. Lorraine found a marine quadrant, remarkably well preserved. This ancient astrolabe was wrapped in oilcloth and flannel, its carved, gold-plated brass pillars inscribed with the names of its maker and user, Harvey Bardem, a Spanish navigator. Lorraine searched the cabin carefully, then said with understanding, "I think I have a rough idea of why they got lost in this small foggy area." "Why?" Hannah asked, unconcerned about the question. As she asked, she plucked an ornate sailor's knife from the wall. With a click, she pulled out only the handle, leaving the blade in the sheath. Seeing her gloom, Lorraine couldn't help but laugh. "This is the navigator's cabin, but there's no compass. Where's their compass? Perhaps it's broken, or perhaps it's lost. Anyway, they lost their way in the fog, trapped in the ocean current, and now, ghosts." Hannah dropped her broken knife. "Why didn't they use a quadrant? It's daytime now." Lorraine pointed regretfully upward. "You can't see the sun during the day, and you can't see the stars at night. This latitude finder was carefully stored away not because it's valuable, but out of helplessness. It's too dead, Captain." Noah's surprised voice came from the next room, abruptly interrupting Hannah. "Come here. I found a logbook. P.S. The Latin sail is the Arabian triangular sail. As the predecessor of the later common staysail, the Latin sail has a long, diagonal mast at the top of the sail. It looks cumbersome and difficult to use and furl. Caravels are famous for their Latin sails, also known as Latin-style galleons. PS2. The pirate adventure begins. If you are listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means it was downloaded and re-uploaded without effort. We warmly invite you to visit our channel, Fanfic World. There you will find the original version of this story and many other novels of various genres. We look forward to seeing you dive into a world of incredible novels. Chapter 55 Habishi Island. 1579, Sir Herrera of Avilés, Spain, sailed across the Atlantic aboard his beloved ship, the Crocodile, bound for the bountiful New World to assume the post of governor of Honduras. However, his blissful life lasted only about 6 months before he contracted an epidemic. Captain Michael Ortega, carrying the ailing sir back to his country for treatment, encountered a storm en route, breaking the compass and veering off course. On a foggy day, the ship inadvertently entered a strange, misty region. Lorraine suspected the ship's crew had offended the gods and Buddhas. Lost in the fog, they struggled for survival when Sir Herrera's epidemic broke out aboard, leading to a long and agonizing odyssey that ultimately claimed the lives of all aboard. This explains the paucity of remains on board. Those who died young or were dying were thrown overboard by those still able, while those who were weak were abandoned by those who were stronger. As the number of people on board dwindled, Those who abandon others endure to fear and despair far longer than those left behind, facing their final death amidst loneliness, guilt, and curse. Lorraine silently read through every section of the diary that wasn't written in code. The first half, ambitious and resolute, chronicled the shallow water crocodile's journey across the Atlantic to the New World. The second half, increasingly scribbled, described the ship's return journey with the sick, encountering storms, disease, being trapped in fog, and murdered crew members. Captain Arteta filled the diary with long passages cursing his employer, Sir Herrera. It was that selfish and mad nobleman who ordered the first wave of survivors abandoned. This once unscathed ocean-going warship, once manned by 80 skilled sailors, lost its last chance to fight, amidst desertion and infighting. Sir Herrera, too, did not meet a peaceful end. After 2 loyal and powerful musketeers fell ill, the 3 men, master and servant, were cruelly exiled to a small boat by the last remaining crew members, left to die without food or water. Good and evil will be rewarded in the end, Lorraine muttered, closing the diary. He looked up and said to Noah and Hannah, "No wonder the captain and navigator are staying in the lower cabin. It turns out this ship has distinguished guests aboard, passengers." "Yes, Sir Herrera of Aviles and his 2 guards are staying in the upper cabin, Aviles." "Herrera." Noah looked puzzled. "I remember." Lorraine smiled and raised the diary in his hand. The Herrera Chamber of Commerce, a close ally of the Desai Chamber of Commerce, is the Chamber of Commerce of Aviles. And this diary can bring disgrace to their family. It is Captain Arteta's most precious gift to us. Lorraine's words piqued Hannah's curiosity. "What's in it? A despicable murder." Lorraine rewrapped the diary in oilcloth and tightened the straps. Sir Herrera coerced the captain into murdering approximately 20 sick crew members. Out of guilt, Captain Arteta recorded everything in detail. "It's a treasure," Hannah succinctly concluded. This diary transformed the shallow crocodile from a wreck into a treasure ship. Leaving the captain's cabin, they journeyed upstairs and found a ruby-encrusted crest ring and a small chest containing approximately 300 pistoles in the knight's cabin. The pistole is a Spanish gold coin, equivalent to the British pound, but now rare. The Spanish now prefer the smaller, scissor-shaped gold coins and Spanish gold dollars, and the pistole is becoming less common, earning it a premium as a collector's item. With the right buyer, one pistole can fetch around 2 to 3 pounds. Compared to the captain's logbook, these items were a mere triumph. The 3 returned with a full cargo. The sailors untied the shallow crocodile and watched the ghost ship disappear once more into the fog, continuing its endless wanderings. The atmosphere on board was depressing. Lorraine gathered his crew for a brief meeting near the hole in the bow. "We found Mr. Arteta's logbook aboard the shallow water crocodile. According to his speculation, this is most likely Heberus." Heberus. The sailors' expressions varied. Hannah, Noah, and Pierce were bewildered, while Kren and Acheron, tied to the bowsprit, were filled with horror. Heberus is the name of a mysterious island, a legend among ocean-going sailors since 1325. Initially, it was speculated to be a new continent at the end of the ocean. By the time Columbus discovered the New World, it had become a devil's island, isolated in the Atlantic. This isolated island myth flourished in Europe from the 15th to the 17th centuries. The Sailor's Mirror mentions Heberus as being located in mid-latitudes further west than Iceland, but this was quickly disproven. In 1674, John Nesborough, an adventurer from Kilbeggs, Ireland, claimed to have found and landed on Heberus. He claimed that a male wizard lived on the island, kept a black rabbit as big as a mountain as a pet, and enjoyed giving gold coins to lucky sailors. But he didn't reveal the island's location, and the crew and sailors on his ship didn't directly respond to his claims. 2 years later, his ship, the Maquia, disappeared in the North Atlantic. Some said they had once again traveled to Heberus and been detained by the island's wizards. Lorraine had always scoffed at the legend of Heberus, but what if what John Nussbolt said was true? He briefly explained the history of Heberus Island to the sailors, and they frowned deeply. Hannah stared into Lorraine's eyes. "Are you planning to explore the fog?" Lorraine held up the compass and shrugged. "We're heading west." "Have we changed direction?" "We've changed direction. We entered the fog from the northeast, initially drifting south, but now we're heading west. The shallow water crocodile has drifted in this small area of sea for 200 years without being able to leave. This proves that we're in a closed circulation." Lorraine circled the hole, gazing at its center with a puzzled expression. If this is truly Heberus Island, then it must be at the center of the circulation. Otherwise, the closed loop would be broken, and the currents would be turbulent, making it impossible for them to be so stable. A wizard delivering gold coins, he smiled, looking up at his crew. Ladies and gentlemen, would you like to visit the wizard's home? It wasn't a difficult decision, given their current dire situation. Nearly 1,000 kilometers from the mainland, their watertight compartments were leaking, and perhaps there were still criminals waiting outside the fog. Everyone knew that if they couldn't dock and repair quickly, their chances of returning safely to England would be close to zero. Exploring the unknown, by contrast, offered far fewer risks. At least, they still had a chance of survival. To save their lives, they chose adventure. To boost morale, Lorraine retrieved the pistols found on the shallow crocodile and distributed 2 coins to each sailor. 6 to 10 pounds, equivalent to several months' salary. This unexpected bonus filled the sailors with joy and excitement. Amidst laughter, Lorraine announced the news of Hebrides, which was unanimously welcomed by the entire ship. The butterfly bloom began to bustle. Slowly but steadily, she turned her bow, cutting across the gyre, heading north, towards the unknown depths of the foggy sea. P.S. Hebrides Island, also known as High Brazil Island, is a legendary civilization, as famous in the West as Atlantis, that sunken civilization. It originally began as a legendary island. The Sailor's Mirror does indeed include a notation for Hebrides Island, but it was removed from subsequent Dutch nautical charts, presumably due to contemporary navigators' confirmation of its inaccuracy. The exact location of Hebrides Island has yet to be determined, and the prevailing assumption is that it is a reef that surfaces only for a few months each year, or perhaps never at all. Chapter 56, On the Rocks. 10 degrees port. 10 degrees. No, only 8 degrees, too much? Turn back, Atron's shrill screams echoed through the thick fog. Lorraine couldn't see anyone, so he could only carefully adjust the steering wheel, following the voice of the sailors, trusting completely in Atron's eyes. They were sailing through a vast reef belt. Densely packed reefs dotted the sea surface, sometimes visible and sometimes invisible, veiled in the fog. The crew could only occasionally spot 1 or 2 that emerged from the water, each one grazing close to the hull, brushing past. This voyage kept everyone on edge. They were dancing with death. On their latest encounter, a knife-sharp reef nearly touched the hull. Lorraine sent Hannah back to the lookout. The fog was so thick that nothing could be seen from there. They could only hope that the fog would occasionally clear, giving them a chance to see far ahead, just once. They were already not far from the island. Reefs are mountains in the sea, and continuous reefs can only appear in shallow seas, and shallow seas can only appear near land. This is a simple inference, and every sailor knows it well. Tension, anticipation, waiting. They know that they are heading in the right direction. Life is approaching. Ride 15 degrees to the right, Lorraine bit her lip and concentrated, and when she heard Atron's shout, she turned the steering wheel. The butterfly tilted the hull and slowly avoided a protruding reef. When it was halfway through, it suddenly shook violently. Boom! The starboard side hid a reef underwater, and the entire ship was lifted and tilted. Lorraine turned the steering wheel sharply to avoid it, and vaguely heard a scream, followed by the sound of splashing water. Someone fell into the water? Before he could comprehend the situation, the sailors on deck cried out, "Look out overboard!" Ms. Yesla overboard on the starboard side. Lorraine's face paled, and he immediately shouted, "Pierce, steer!" He quickly locked the steering wheel, sprinted to the starboard side, and without a second thought, leaped into the air. Splash! Icy water enveloped him, and Lorraine opened his eyes. The current was strong. The turbulent current churned beneath the surface, making the water turbulent and murky. But with the help of his eyelids, Lorraine could still see nearly 100 meters, far better than on the surface. How foolish! Why hadn't he thought of launching a pilot before? He shook his head, and the first thing he saw was the wreckage of the butterfly flower. A broken reef, hidden under a meter of water, had torn a long, diagonal hole in the starboard hull. The hole stretched roughly 2 watertight compartments, but aside from fragments of hull, there was no other debris nearby. The only watertight compartments on the ship that were free of debris were those that were actively flooded. Fortunately, the Papalianus didn't take on more water, and thanks to the emergency evasive maneuver, it had already completely cleared the reef. Lorraine slid around, searching, and soon found Hina in the distance. She had been flung into the water from over 20 meters above, and with no time to protect herself, she was crushed unconscious by the hard sea. She was sinking, her eyes closed, a dense bubble of air, her long limbs stretched out, motionless, drifting further and further away with the current. The distance between them was about 50 or 60 meters. Lorraine gritted his teeth, surfaced, and shouted toward the blurry shadow of the pansy, "Pierce, brother. I'm here. What should we do? The reef is in the flooded tanks, so the ship won't sink for now." Lorraine took a deep breath. "You take the helm. Follow Atron's instructions and continue to cross the current. Don't stop. The current is too strong. If we force the anchor, we'll be pushed sideways and you'll run aground again. What about you? I found Hina. Go get her now. We'll see you in Hebisi." With that, Lorraine dove back under the water. Swinging his legs along with the current, he swam like a fish, swooping towards Hina. A moment later, Hina reappeared in his sight, still seemingly unconscious, with almost no bubbles around her lips. Lorraine swam even faster, leaping over, hugging her, and surging rapidly through the water, emerging from the water with a splash. All around was a milky white sea of fog. The Papilio had vanished. Lorraine took a few deep breaths and swam, holding Hina's head, toward a nearby reef, occasionally diving to check his direction and make sure he wasn't drifting off course. He lifted Hina onto the reef, removed her heavy, wet smock, rolled it up, and placed it behind her neck. He tilted his head back, lifted his chin, and meticulously cleared her mouth and nose of debris. Then, he pinched Hina's nose, opened her mouth, leaned in, and covered her lips with his, blowing rapidly. Hina's lips were soft and cool. Lorraine breathed in, then released his grip, letting the air out. He repeated this 5 times. After 5 times, he traced Hina's ribs to the xiphoid process, raised 2 fingers, and pressed it with his palm. He folded his hands in a cross, arms straight, and pressed down vertically. With one compression, he called out, "Hina, wake up." With another, he called out, "Hina, wake up." 12 compressions, 5 breaths, repeated over and over again, 3 rounds in a row. Hina coughed violently, and clear water flowed from her mouth and nose. Lorraine, overjoyed, quickly knelt on one knee, picked Hina up, and gently placed her on his bent thigh. He patted her back gently, helping the water in her airways and stomach to drain freely. A minute later, Hina finally regained consciousness. She lay weakly in Lorraine's arms, opened her eyes, and whispered, "I drowned. You fell from the watchtower and were knocked unconscious by the sea water. You accidentally drank a few more mouthfuls of water, so it doesn't count as drowning." "Really?" She looked at the vast fog in confusion. "Where's the butterfly flower? She can't stop in the reef area, so I asked them to go to Hebisi first." "Where's Hebisi?" Lorraine raised his hand and pointed in a direction. "Don't worry, I will take you to swim." "Yeah." The two hugged each other quietly and rested on the reef for more than half an hour. Hina felt that her strength had recovered a little, so she tugged at Lorraine's sleeve. "I can do it." Lorraine helped her stand up, and the two jumped into the water again, paddling gently. "How far is Hebisi?" Hina asked. "I don't know. What if? We'll find it," Lorraine interrupted with a laugh. "George told me it's in the center of the fog. We'll see it soon." Hina stopped talking and took out the sling she had with her. Lorraine tied a knot around Hina's waist, leaving 2 meters of it, and then tightened it around his own waist. "Are you ready?" "Yes." The two swam deeper into the fog, Lorraine in front, Hina behind. Connected by a thin sling. Like the Papillon, they cut through the gyre. After swimming for over an hour, they finally broke free from the reef. The water suddenly warmed, the fog began to thin, and the current weakened. Lorraine finally saw the stars. It turned out, it was already night. He stopped in the water, dragging Hina for a long time, fighting the strong current. He was exhausted, dizzy, and even his swimming style became clumsy. Hina looked at him worriedly. Lorraine reached out and patted Hina's face, smiling. "Look, we have passed through the fog. If we had an octant at this time, I could calculate the latitude here. Let me swim by myself. We are about to see Hebisi. I promised you that I would definitely take you ashore." Chapter 57, Tempting Devil's Island. Under the stars and moon, Lorraine finally saw the outline of the island. Just a few miles away, it was dotted with silvery white beaches and a lush jungle. In the center of the island stood 2 volcanoes, the western one higher, the eastern one lower. Their peaks were rounded, and from their peaks, 2 columns of smoke rose into the blue sky, resembling the silhouette of a gigantic black rabbit. So, John Naspel hadn't lied. There really was a black rabbit the size of a mountain on Hebisi Island. So, where was the wizard? Confused, the 2 men, exhausted, were washed ashore by the waves. Lorraine managed only a few steps before reaching the dry sand and failing. He staggered to his knees, fell on his back, and was silent. Hannah, startled, rushed over, only to discover that Lorraine had fallen asleep. She gazed tenderly at Lorraine's pale face, leaned in, and gently kissed his forehead. "Sleep, my captain. I will always protect you." Lorraine slept soundly. When he awoke, the night was still the same. A bonfire burned beside him. A few sticks were propped up on the beach, tied to a sling. On the sling hung Hannah's pristine white combat uniform, only half dried. He knew he had slept only briefly. Lorraine turned and sat up, and, in a strange place, saw Hannah, naked, sitting with her back to him, knees hugged, facing the sea. The bright moonlight illuminated her smooth, coffee-colored skin, giving it a subtle, jade-like sheen. A moonlit beauty, beyond compare. The noise of his rising startled Hannah. 2 daggers were at hand. She crossed her arms, grasped them, and turned. Suddenly, their eyes met. A man reflected in her emerald eyes, sitting cross-legged on the sand, one hand on his knees, the other resting his chin. His expression was half smile, his gaze fixed, as if he were admiring some masterpiece of art. "Tisk, tisk, tisk, what a figure. Why do you always wear a smock? Ugh." The flying knife flew out of her hand and sank into the ground. Hannah quickly wrapped herself up. Although the combat uniform was slimming and more beautiful than the loose coat, it was still not as good-looking as when she was naked. Lorraine felt very sorry. In his regret, he saw Hannah's blood-red face and panic-stricken eyes, and decided to hide the little thoughts in his heart and not say a word. He smiled and poked the campfire. "Hannah, didn't you faint from exhaustion? How did you wake up so quickly?" "To be precise, I just took a nap." Lorraine shrugged. "Whale hunters are sons of the sea. In the arms of our mother, we are stronger than ever and recover faster, but that. Lorraine laughed and jumped up, and with a clang, he drew out his long knife. "I'm going to spear 2 fish in the water. When it's daybreak, I'll go find the butterfly flower and the wizard who likes to give gold coins. The sun rises in the east." Daybreak arrived, and a golden light bathed the sky and earth, illuminating the tiny island of Hebishi. A breathtakingly beautiful fairyland unfolded before Lorraine and Hannah. Azure sea, silver sand, sun-facing palm trees, and broadleaf shrubs. The rabbit-like mountains in the distance were black, while below them lay a continuous expanse of deep green, surrounded by a pale and tender green of sandy beaches. The quartz sand was a flawless silver, and the water before them was crystal clear. Lorraine and Hannah sat side by side in the middle of the beach, their shoulders touching. The bonfire beside them had long since gone out, and wisps of black smoke from the woodpile drifted toward the horizon, echoing with the smoke from the distant mountains and the misty wall at the horizon, swaying gracefully. Hannah was mesmerized by this beauty. "Lorraine, yeah, why do they call this place Devil's Island?" "Because the legend about it suddenly appeared overnight, like a devil whispering in someone's ear." "Really? Of course not." Lorraine laughed dumbly. In the early Renaissance, people found Pythagoras' theory of a spherical Earth from Greek texts, and found evidence from Eratosthenes and Ptolemy, and began to doubt the flat Earth theory advocated by the Catholic Church. People were willing to believe that the Earth was round, and among them, navigators were the most convinced. The legend of Hebishi began to appear in the mouths of navigators from then on. They said that there was a new continent to the west of Europe, on the other side of the ocean, and they used their imagination to describe it. Even though Columbus discovered America, which was different from the legendary Hebishi, they were unwilling to admit that what their ancestors had passed down and described was false, so they reluctantly turned the Hebishi continent into Hebishi Island. It carries the navigators' resistance to the Church's rule, just like Copernicus and Bruno's heliocentric theory. That's the real reason it's called Devil's Island, because in the eyes of the Church, every adventurer who seeks it is considered a corrupted person seduced by the devil, so it's so important. Hannah blinked and stood up. "Lorraine, where's the Papilio? We didn't see the ship when we swam over. If it didn't sink on the reef, it must be on the back of the island, blocked by the volcano. Around the island? Or across, around the island." Lorraine also stood up and brushed the sand off his pants. "If we rush into the jungle rashly, I'm afraid we'll encounter a wizard offering gold coins. If he's unfriendly, that's bad." The action plan was decided. Lorraine and Hannah were both nimble and action-oriented. Once the decision was made, they set out immediately. They carefully followed the coastline, cutting through the brush and circumnavigating the island. They encountered few obstacles along the way, and in half a day, they found the Papilio, stranded on the back of the island. She lurched onto the beach, her bow high, revealing her hideously battered hull in the sunlight. Seeing the sailors bustling about, Lorraine smiled heartily. Those guys, they're doing a good job. Unbeknownst to Lorraine, the scene on board was quite different. The Iris had arrived on the island after Lorraine, only 4 hours before, sails hoisted, riding the wind, to the beach. By then, daylight had broken. After successfully beaching the ship, they spent another 2 hours felling wood, using palm logs as wheels, pooling their resources to straighten the hull and lay planking. Only then was the Iris finally free from the specter of a sinking ship. With the pressure of survival gone, other worries surged. Kren, his mooring axe in hand, roared at the sailors to cut wood. Pierce and a few other sailors cleaned out the cargo hold, brought food and water to the beach, and erected a makeshift shelter. Noya knelt silently at the wheel, the crystal ball of fate before her, an equally silent white ear resting on her shoulder. The magical silver tarot spread out before her. Shuffling the cards and reading the divinations again and again, Atron sauntered about like a savior, seemingly idle and yet incredibly busy. Everyone harbored an unspoken hesitation. Since Lorraine and Henna fell overboard, the Iris had been sailing for nearly 10 hours. At a speed of 0.5 knots, they had covered nearly 10 kilometers, and the distance would only increase. With such a long distance, and trapped in the fog, could Lorraine really swim to the island with Henna? What would they do if they lost their captain? Atron was the one who most firmly believed that Lorraine had perished at the bottom of the sea. He grew restless, believing that having saved the ship, he deserved the support to become the Iris's new captain. To gain legitimacy, he needed the support of the crew. Crone, Pierce, Noya, who should start? Atron's gaze roamed over the three men. Seeing Noya sitting alone at the wheel, a smug smile crossed his handsome face. For a romantic gentleman, who better to target than a cowardly, worthless Roma girl, yet beloved by the sailors? Conquer this woman, and then, seize the thrones of captain and president. Chapter 58, The Destiny. For Noah, this was a sacred self-divination. To ensure calmness, piety, confidence, and accuracy, she had used the most complex deck of cards, asking the 6 most obvious questions. Will there be food tonight? Yes. Will there be water today? Yes. Will there be a place to sleep? How many people will sleep? 1. Will we stay on this island forever? No. Are there any living people on the island? Yes. The answers were obvious, and the divination result was correct. More importantly, through the ancient spread of cards 41 to 77, her mind was completely focused. Attached to the crystal ball of fate, she truly heard the sigh of fate. The most crucial divination was about to begin. Noah plucked the cards in front of her like a flower, and one by one, the overturned minor arcana flew out from the deck, dividing into 4 groups according to suit. Wands, pentacles, cups, swords. Only 22 major arcana remained from the floating scattered cards. Noya closed her eyes and flicked her sleeve. The scattered cards gathered, forming a bundle and placing it within the halo of the crystal ball of fate. Captain, are Lorraine and Henna still alive? She silently questioned fate, her slender fingers reaching out and tapping the deck. Snap! The deck sprang to life, its pattern undulating with her finger, bouncing like a spring. After 7 jumps, nearly half the deck, 12 in total, was discarded to the side. Noya's finger touched the heart of the 13th card. This was the Sirius spread, a card inherited from ancient Egypt. Unlike other complex ancient spreads, Sirius was known for its clarity, directness, sensitivity, and vulnerability. Using a single chosen card to reveal questions, it was the most commonly used and trusted self-divination method for fortune-tellers. Noya opened her eyes and gently turned the card over. Sirius projected its response onto the card, upright. The Hanged Man. The Hanged Man, accepting trials, restrictions on movement, sacrifice, fear and hardship, resisting temptation, experiencing both loss and gain, learning lessons, rising from the ashes, extensive learning, and devoted love. Were Lorraine and Henna dead? Or trapped somewhere? Or had they found their way out of their predicament? Why such an ambiguous situation? Did Sirius not know? Or was he unwilling to tell? Noya stared at the silver tarot, frowning in deep thought. Suddenly, a dark shadow loomed, perfectly positioned between the crystal ball of fate and Sirius, abruptly interrupting Noya's meditation. Noya's face flushed, and she nodded, twisting her sleeves, her eyes frantic, at a loss for what to do. The white ears on her shoulders bristled, raised their heads, and bared their fangs at Atrin with a menacing smile. Atrin shrugged at the lazy white ears, leaning against the steering wheel with a self-righteous, uninhibited smile. Miss Sarah, yes, I was just down below supervising the work, and I heard quite a few sailors criticizing you. That made me unhappy. Noya lowered her head, her face reddening even more. I'm sorry, no, you don't need to apologize. Atrin waved his arms vigorously. There shouldn't be criticism of beautiful ladies on a gentleman's ship. If there's, it's definitely not the lady's fault, it's her upbringing. He took a deep breath, ready to seize the opportunity to give Noya a caring hug. But as soon as he opened his arms, his white ears and tail stood up, and his fleshy claws flicked out with a clang, 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 clang. Atrin decided to pause. He took a step closer, looking down at Noya, his aura of dominance radiating unbridled. Miss Sarah, you are the most distinguished sailor on this ship. Like me, you are the ruler and the person in charge. This prestige should not be questioned. Why would there be doubts? I found that it was actually our arrogant shipwrights and the underage vice president who were deliberately trying to sideline you. They are in cahoots. No. Mr. Desai, Kren and Pierce are very good, but I don't know anything and can't help. A lady should enjoy her honor. Yatrin took a step closer, almost stepping on Noya's silver tarot arrogantly. If I were the captain, Mr. Desai, Noya shouted as if she had mustered up the courage, her voice so low that it was almost inaudible. When we were passing the reef, my crystal ball was hit and it seems to be cracked. Can you help me take a look? As she spoke, her beautiful hands lifted the crystal ball like a blooming flower and raised it high above her head. Yatrin's eyes followed the crystal ball upward, and he asked unconsciously, where's the crack? The 7, 14, and 21 hairs, they intersect, and that crack, so many hairs, how can I? Yatrin squinted and peered, suddenly catching sight of the white-eared eyes at the center of the crystal ball. The little black cat had somehow crouched atop Noya's head, its round eyes wide open, piercing through the crystal ball, staring intently at Yatrin. What kind of eyes were those? Its yellow pupils, like symmetrical hemispheres, formed a tapering diamond-shaped vertical pupil in the center. Originally black, the crystal ball had tinted it purple. Black tinged with purple, purple tinged with black. Ouch, Yatrin shuddered. Noya slowly rose to her feet, her lithe body imbued with a strange charm. No matter how she moved, the crystal ball remained motionless. She straightened, looked at Yatrin's bewildered face, and uttered a soft sound. Vit-I, Ziv, Zxi are the numbers of destiny. There are 22 major arcana cards. The Fool is king, and there are 3 in Samsara. Samsara is tarot, it is a card, it is a number, it is destiny, everything has an end and a beginning. This beginning and end is 7, it is a circle, and it is the connection of all destinies. Chariot. Those in the right position deserve power, while those who are vain seek glory. Moderation. The right position makes the mediocre strong, and self-righteousness makes the capable redundant. World. Loyalty to the mission can bring good luck, but betrayal of promises will only lead to failure. Atrin Desai, a huge mistake will torture you, will entangle you, make you restless for a lifetime, and make you unable to sleep or eat. Atrin's face was struggling with uneasiness, hesitation, and fear. Atrin Desai, a huge mistake will torture you, will entangle you, will ruin your reputation, and will make you shattered. The struggle disappeared. Atrin's eyes became more confused, and his expression became more frightened. His throat crackled strangely, and he mechanically asked, what should do? Fate is merciful. Noya raised his head and sang loudly. Good and evil will be rewarded. Although you have harbored undue desires, you have fortunately avoided irreversible actions. Kneel. Beg fate for forgiveness, and plead for atonement. Atrin sank to his knees. Please, tell, atone, cleanse your sins. Lorraine Drake's life or death remains uncertain, and you volunteered to help him. You will use your humble life to turn the wheel of fate, to secure a glimmer of hope for your captain's survival. Atrin Desai, willingly, voluntarily, joyfully, Atrin muttered silently, pulling a well-worn pistol from his pocket and slowly bringing it to his lips. He gently opened his mouth, slowly but firmly. There was no struggle, no hesitation in his movements. Even a smile played on his face, relieved and delighted. Just then, Captain, A sudden explosion erupted beneath the ship. Lorraine, holding Henna's hand, stepped out of the jungle with a smile on his face. His movements were swift and unhurt, his movements unbearable. The captain is back. Our brave and fearless captain has returned with Lady Jesla. Hail the captain, hail Drake, hail Nilde, hail Habusi. Hearing the cries of hail from the beach, Noah was stunned for a moment, then suddenly beamed. She glanced disdainfully at Acheron, who was half holding the enormous pistol in his mouth, ready to chew. She wrinkled her nose in boredom. The hanged man. So Sirius wants to tell me the captain has risen from the ashes, but also wants to persuade me to give you a chance to mend your ways. White ears, he's really nosy. Meow, never mind. Since you'll need to ask Sirius for information later, I'll spare your life. White ears, scratch him. At a command, white ears leaped from Noah's head, claws extended, crisscrossed. Swish. Pistol tinkled to the ground. Acheron covered his face, his mouth open, his eyes focused. Ah. My handsome face. P.S. The Sirius spread, an ancient Egyptian tarot spread, consists of only one card turned over and is a particularly famous divination spread. PS2. Tarot, some say, originated in Rome, the word meaning the closed loop of fate. Tarot, rota, tora, orat, ader equals the tarot wheel, as orally transmitted by Hathor. This is why fate is both a tarot and a circle, a concept that resonates philosophically with the Chinese concept of karma and reincarnation. PS2, it's been 30 days since I posted the book, so fast. Chapter 59 The Urgent Matter. Lorraine had returned. He had rescued Henna, traversed the fog, swam across expanses of ocean 10 kilometers or more, and overcome obstacles that sailors believed only angels or demons could overcome, emerging unscathed. Before his plunge, he had been the guild master, the employer, the admiral, the captain, a young, yet skilled, and commanding seafarer. Upon his return, he had become a hero, a legend, and a leader. Believers in God believe in the Holy Trinity, and faithful sailors, even more so, understand life at sea through the Holy Trinity. Their ship is the Father, their sailors are the Son, and their captain is the ship's soul spirit. The Holy Trinity is a trinity of persons, the same Trinity. Though not divine, the ship, the sailors, and the captain share this same Trinity. A strong captain means a strong ship, and a strong ship means every sailor is strong. Every sailor aboard the Papillion Flower feels honored to possess such a powerful spirit. They will be invincible. Lorraine hadn't imagined this adventure would bring him such immense honor. He'd initially worried about morale on board, the wrecked ship, the isolated island, the dead end. Now, it seemed, his worries were over. He quickly gathered his crew. On deck, Lorraine cradled the docile white ears and looked at Acheron, whose head was wrapped like a mummified corpse, with a strange expression. I say, teasing a cat with gold coins? Do you really think White Ears is small and good-tempered, completely transformed? White Ears yawned lazily, revealing his fierce fangs, which gleamed in the sun. Acheron shuddered, and his face full of bandages showed his grievance. Captain, I am the heir painstakingly trained by the Desai family. I am a noble and an elite. Do you think I would be so stupid as to use gold coins to tease a cat? Lorraine's expression became even weirder. Didn't you say the question yourself? Do you think how lazy White Ears is? Henna caught a mouse in front of it, but it didn't even bother to scratch it. Why would it think of scratching you for no reason? This is what I find strange. Acheron scratched the bandage embarrassedly. I clearly remember that I insisted on feeding the cat with pistol, but rationally speaking, why should I feed the cat? Can't figure it out. I can't figure it out. Then don't think about it, huh? Lorraine cleared his throat. Gentlemen and ladies, from the volcano in the middle of this island, we can basically conclude that this is the Habusi that John Aspel mentioned. He did not deceive the world. There are indeed black rabbits as big as mountains on this island. This brings us a problem. Since the black rabbit is real, then where is the wizard? Little Pierce's eyes widened in horror. The wizard who loved giving gold coins to sailors? The wizard who left Mr. Nuspert on the island and never appeared again. To be precise, the first is Nuspert's description, and the second is the conjecture of bored people. Lorraine smacked his lips. Let's assume for the time being that wizards exist, and gold coins exist. At least 100 years ago, Nuspert encountered them. Kren frowned. Captain, our priority isn't exploration, it's survival. I know, my dear Kren. The situation is that our ship is damaged, and our food and water won't last 3 days. There might be a wizard hiding somewhere on the island. Even if there isn't a wizard, we know nothing about this island, let alone how to get out. Lorraine broke down the details one by one and quickly determined the next plan. To maximize combat effectiveness, the Butterfly had 120 sailors aboard. In the naval battle with the Reindeer, there were no casualties or serious injuries, only 7 minor injuries, and their movements were unimpeded. So they still had 120 men, which was sufficient, but also posed a tremendous logistical burden. Lorraine divided Kren's priorities into 3 parts: repairing the boat, gathering food, finding water, exploring the island, and eliminating potential safety hazards. The seamen and crew were to perform their respective duties according to these objectives. Kren would lead 40 crew members in the logging team to repair the boat. They would use pulleys to lower the boat onto the beach, gather sufficient wood, seal the holes, and apply glue and paint. Atrin would lead 40 crew members in the logistics team, fishing, hunting, and gathering whatever food they could, while also collecting as much clean water as possible. Pierce and Noah would lead 20 crew members to dry the fish, prepare other food for storage, and boil and store all the water. Lorraine and Henna would lead 20 crew members in the exploration team, exploring the island. Their primary mission was to find a source of fresh water, followed by understanding the wizard's intentions and eliminating any future dangers for the butterfly flower. Under Lorraine's ever-increasing authority, the 3 groups were quickly assigned. The strongest followed Kren, the most skilled followed Atrin, the most resourceful followed Lorraine and Henna, and the rest followed Pierce and Noah to handle odd jobs. After a night of rest, Lorraine's men gathered behind him. Their mission was to find a suitable source of fresh water on Habishi, and to that end, he prepared to enter the jungle. Searching for fresh water on a deserted island is a basic seaman skill, and the first thing to do is to establish the distinction between islands and reefs. Generally speaking, islands and reefs are both surrounded by water, but islands are above high tide, while reefs are below. In other words, small land masses that never sink are called islands, while those that sink at high tide are called reefs. Sailors also had a simpler way to identify islands and reefs: vegetation. Seawater is not suitable for shrubs to grow. Since Habishi boasts extensive jungle, it certainly isn't constantly submerged in the sea, making it a true island. Establishing this concept is crucial for those at sea, because only islands in the ocean have sufficient conditions to store fresh water, while reefs generally lack it. Having determined the possibility of finding water, the next step is to purposefully search for it. Fresh water on islands mostly comes from accumulated rainfall, and the distribution of water sources is unique. First, water often exists on the windward side of the island. Second, rocky caves, isolated from the sea, also facilitate freshwater storage in the terrain. This means that Lorraine and his expedition team must venture deep into an unfamiliar jungle. He pondered this issue. Last night, after consulting the stars, he determined that Habishi Island is located at a relatively high latitude, roughly between 50 and 52 degrees north latitude. Jungles at these latitudes are generally less prone to swarms of flies and mosquitoes that carry poisonous and disease-causing insects. However, with 2 active volcanoes at its center and a nearly closed wall of fog surrounding the sea, this unique terrain makes Habishi Island very hot and muggy. It is a tropical jungle at a high latitude, perhaps even more dangerous, a rainforest. Swarms of flies, venomous spiders, fluttering bees, venomous snakes hiding in the brush, any one of these could easily take a sailor's life. For safety, Lorraine required every sailor to don a cold weather smock, cinching their cuffs and boots with string, pulling on their hoods, and even imitating Henna's example by covering their faces with sailors' kerchiefs, leaving only their eyes and hands exposed, anointed with ointment. Then came the ship's readily available equipment: machetes, torches, ropes, long wooden sticks, a small compass, and a telescope. No one was left out. Once everything was ready, Lorraine took a deep breath and chopped down the bushes in front of him. Let's go. Let's go exploring. I heard that asking for votes on Mondays is incredibly effective. Chapter 61. To jump off the boat? Whoosh, whoosh. Before Lorraine stood a patch of short grass with broad blades. He repeatedly flared it with a torch, dislodging a multitude of tiny insects. Then he switched to a long wooden pole and, standing at a distance, pursed his lips as he prodded. The team had been deep in the jungle for 3 hours, advancing less than 2 kilometers, slower than the pansy flower had been traveling in the fog. Yet, no one objected. Caution is a virtue when navigating an unfamiliar jungle. For example, the sailors had initially objected to the course, full-body smothering garments, as the island's weather was stifling, and seafarers preferred the scorching sun and the gentle breeze. But after an incident where a spider had landed on their face, such complaints vanished completely. It was a beautiful spider, dark brown with lighter, camouflage markings on its legs and body, symmetrically complementing each other. It vanished in the tree, its silk thread drifting like a withered leaf. It possessed a pair of enormous fangs. A knowledgeable sailor recognized it as a tropical lace tarantula. While not particularly aggressive, it possessed a terrifying venom capable of knocking people unconscious. It happened to land on a sailor's face towel. After that, complaints and objections ceased, and Lorraine, the leader, became even more cautious, burning torches through nearly every tree and leaf. Even so, a sailor was bitten by a venomous snake that scurried down from a tree branch. Hannah's sharp knife shaved off nearly half a pound of flesh before the blood began to flow again. Fortunately, this horrific experience was finally over. Passing the last patch of grass, they stepped onto a vast, flat expanse of volcanic rock. The dark slopes were the traces of past lava flows. Its dense, weather-resistant nature and high metallic content made it not only an excellent natural stone but also a barrier to vegetation. Bare rock, to the sailors, signified safety. Lorraine breathed a sigh of relief, waved his hand, and said, 500 meters ahead, rest for half an hour, and drink water. A soft cheer echoed through the ranks. They pressed forward, choosing spots on the exposed rock to rest. The sailors, sweltering in the heat for a long day, eagerly unbuttoned their overalls, exposing their sweat-soaked bodies to the sea breeze. Lorraine chose a higher rock and stood shoulder to shoulder with Hannah, surveying the island's coastline from afar. Have you found a more suitable passage? Hannah's voice was thick with worry. Today's journey is too long. Even if we do find a source of water, we can't guarantee the sailors' safe loading. Lorraine shook his head helplessly. He squatted down, drew white marks on the rugged volcanic rocks with a machete, and whispered, generally speaking, the windward side of an island is the flattest and the windward side is the steepest. The windward side of Hebesi Island is on the north. We both landed on the west side, and the butterfly flower was on the east side. In that case, why didn't we go from the north when we were looking for a ship? Because it's closer, Lorraine sighed, and I'm worried that we'll find the wreckage of the butterfly flower on the cliffs to the south. If they land on the windward beach, even if they meet later, at least they will be safe. Hannah nodded in agreement. Lorraine continued drawing lines on the ground. By skirting the mountain, we'll reach the windward side. There, the vegetation will be sparser, and there's a greater chance of a freshwater source, like a small lake or deep pool. Once we find it, we can map the shortest route to the beach, creating a safe passage and loading the water. What if there's none? If there isn't one, then we can only go to the leeward side. The rock formations there are the most intact, making caves more likely, but the freshwater reserves will be much smaller, and if we only find one or two, they likely won't be enough for our needs. Hannah lowered her head in thought, remembering that during their search for the boat, they had indeed found a few small pools of water, barely enough to fill a few barrels. Not only would this be difficult to transport, but the water wouldn't be enough to sustain the entire crew for several days. As Lorraine had feared, the water reserves on the leeward side could only be used as a supplement, not a fundamental solution to the water shortage for hundreds of people. If only it could rain. Yes. If it rained, we wouldn't have to worry about water. The team continued their journey, following the gentle slope of volcanic rock, winding northward. Soon, they reached the windward side of the island. Amidst the emerald sea, white sand, and scattered lush green trees, they could see two pools of water, one high and one low. The high one was smaller, gourd-shaped, about 5 or 6 meters long and 2 or 3 meters short. It sat at the junction of the volcanic rock and the sparse forest, the color of jade, gently rippling in the wind. The low one was huge, round, about 60 or 70 meters across. It sat right on the beach, with forest on one side and sand on the other, its colors translucent and magnificent. The sailors were excited, and impatiently thanked their leader as they rushed down the slope. Lorraine was unable to stop them and could only watch as 4 or 5 of them rushed into the forest, only to escape screaming and scrambling from it a moment later. Following them were mighty wild boars, their tusks bared. Hurrah! There were 6 boars, one the fastest, charging with incredible force. It lowered its head to catch up with the slowest sailor, yelping and raising its head. Its sharp tusks pierced the sailor's back, piercing his chest. The sailor's eyes widened, his hands spread out helplessly, only to be quickly flung away by the boar. His body tumbled onto the volcanic rock, leaving a trail of glaring blood. Lorraine drew his two swords with a clang, lowering his body. Fight! Henna charged forward. Leaning forward, she took a few steps before releasing 4 red velvet throwing knives. One of them struck the killer boar's eye, piercing through the socket and burying itself into the hilt. The boar howled and leapt away, but the remaining boars leaped past it and charged at Henna. But Henna was not alone. She launched a flying knife, and Lorraine's figure followed it. Behind Lorraine were a dozen brave sailors, who leaped past Henna, dodging their fleeing companions, and joined the beast in groups of 2 or 3. 2 sailors were instantly sent flying. Lorraine dodged the attack, spinning lightly, his long knife shielding him like a flower petal, gently slicing through the hind legs of 2 wild boars. Bright red blood splattered, and the 2 boars wailed and fell to the ground. Henna, having recovered her breath, leaped to avoid the boar's charge, launching 4 more knives. 3 of them landed, and one pierced the boar's hindquarters, opening a massive wound as it ran. This effectively put the 4th boar out of action. The overwhelming killing power of Lorraine and Henna relieved the pressure on the sailors, and they engaged the boars in groups of 5 or 6. Their fleeing companions also turned back, further widening the numerical advantage. After 2 men were sent flying and 1 severely injured, a rapier from the left wing group finally pierced the boar's eye, severing the blade instantly and sending the animal reeling. On the right, Lorraine ended the battle. He spun back into the fray, reclaiming his opponent from the sailor's grasp. 2 sharp Finnish longswords flew up and down, circling the clumsy boar. The boar couldn't reach Lorraine, and its most threatening charge was suppressed by the surrounding sailors. After 14 blows, Lorraine finally struck the boar between the eyebrows, effectively killing it. The sudden encounter lasted only a few minutes. 1 sailor was killed, 3 were seriously injured, and 4 more were sent flying, each suffering varying degrees of bruises and contusions. The toll was truly heavy. Observing the devastating scene, Lorraine sheathed his sword and glared angrily at the sailors who had acted without authorization. Unauthorized, running and howling. Gentlemen, do you really want to jump off the ship? P.S. The jump off the ship was a popular and brutal method of execution among pirates at the time. The basic procedure was to place scraps of fish or other foul-smelling objects over the side of the ship to attract sharks, then force the sailors to jump from the extended planks. If they could successfully climb back onto the deck, their crime was atoned for. If not, the captain would declare them guilty. In Pirates of the Caribbean, Captain Jack Sparrow seems to have been subjected to this punishment by his own crew. For a captain, it was truly tragic. Chapter 61 Longship Remains. In just one foray into the forest, the expedition lost one of its 20 sailors, 4 seriously injured, and 4 slightly wounded. And this was despite being well prepared and suffering virtually no damage during the foray, a single oversight. The wild boars of Hubisi are ferocious and enormous, each weighing at least 400 or 500 pounds, with sharp tusks and blood-red eyes. Judging by their aggressive nature, they are likely carnivores. Furthermore, they are likely at the top of the island's food chain, dominating and arrogant. Considering the growth and reproduction rates of pigs, the size of this dominant herd in the windward forests is difficult to estimate. It's certainly not too many, but certainly not too few. This means the forests are far from safer than they appear. Fortunately, they've discovered 2 suspected freshwater sources. With a bit of luck, they won't have to fight the wild boars in the forest. This determines the order of their exploration. Carrying the harvested wild boar and the corpses of their fallen companions, the wounded team sneaked through the sparse woods and came to the large pond by the beach. They soon confirmed that this was indeed one of the main sources of fresh water on the island. There were obvious signs of wild animals roaming around the pond, and most of the footprints were hoofed. There were no killers like bear paws and cat claws, and no terrifying island crocodiles. The good news one after another made Lorraine finally breathe a sigh of relief. Then there was the second problem, how to collect fresh water and the rich food resources on the windward slope. Shipping along the island is the best way, but the butterfly flower cannot be launched, and the 2 assault boats together cannot bear the heavy responsibility of transportation. Lorraine looked thoughtfully at a wild deer peeking out from the edge of the woods. Henna, do you think that if we camp on the windward beach, the wild boars will come to drive us away? If we camp here, what will happen to the Papilio? We can camp separately. The logging team will stay on the narrow east beach, and the logistics team and the exploration team will move here. In this way, the collected drinking water can be processed and stored on the spot, and only a small amount of transportation is needed to meet the needs of the logging team. Hannah raised her eyebrows. There are 2 streams of fresh water here. We will set up more traps by the pool and actively hunt. Smart wild animals will avoid here and go to the woods to drink water. We can also fire cannons. Lorraine bit her lip and added, the 6-pound cannon at the stern is very light and can be transported here by assault boats. It can be used for defense of the beach camp, and it can also scare away wild animals and open up space. Once the Papaleo is repaired, transporting drinking water will not be a problem. After a few words of discussion, the decision was made. Lorraine ordered the sailors who were able to move to split into 2. One group dug trenches on the beach and built artificial islands to create a camping site for hundreds of people. Another group cut wood and made a log to report back to the East Beach. However, the first thing to be completed was a simple raft. 3 sailors used their overalls as sails, made a crude sail raft, and drifted along the coastline to the east coast. At sunset, Yatrin arrived at the new camp with 2 assault boats, 20 sailors, shovels, and many empty barrels. He greatly accelerated the excavation of the sand island and brought Lorraine a piece of news. On the way here, they found the remains of a longship under a cliff. Longship? Viking longship? Lorraine asked in surprise. Yes, judging by the slender proportions of the ship, it should be a long warship of the Snecht type, popular in the 9th century. But because it was getting dark, we didn't go aboard to explore. 9th century Vikings. Lorraine was interested, patting Atrin on the shoulder in appreciation. You are not only knowledgeable, but you also made the right decision, Atrin. Compared to the ruins of an ancient ship that won't escape, digging through the sand island before nightfall and protecting it from wild beasts are our top priorities. Tomorrow, we will see the ancient ship. Construction of the sand island and the transfer of personnel and supplies continued all night. When the sun rose the next day, a semi-independent, arc-shaped sand island had appeared on the windswept sand plain of Hebasi. The island covers an area of nearly 1 square kilometer, facing the sea on one side and the sparse forest on the other. It is separated from the sparse forest by a 2-meter wide waterway, nearly 2 meters deep, which allows seawater to flow in. The 2 sides are raised and supported by simple shrub fences. Land beasts dislike the sea, and with a simple waterway protecting the camp, wild boars and other ferocious beasts hiding in the forests will not launch large-scale attacks. As for sporadic attacks, the sailors on duty can handle them. Sand Island connects to the main island via a 4 to 5 meter wide log bridge. A freshwater pond is located 40 to 50 meters across the bridge. Hina and Pierce will organize the sailors to set a series of traps on the windward side of the forest. They are also responsible for the temporary camp. Fishing, hunting, boat repairs, and freshwater collection have completely resolved the butterfly flower's survival crisis. Lorraine has also made simple adjustments to the crew's assignments. Pierce and Hina will oversee the windward camp, with Hina also acting as its protector and responding to emergencies. Kren and Noah will be in charge of the East Coast beach. The entrance and exit there are narrow, flanked by impassable rock formations. While the defensive structures there are certainly not as secure as the windward camp, they can stay aboard the boat at night. Noah is the protector of the East Coast beach. Despite her shy nature, the Ron Witch's individual combat prowess far surpassed that of the 2 normal humans, Atrin and Kren, firmly securing the 3rd position on the ship. Lorraine further streamlined the expedition team, resting the wounded and assigning the unmoved sailors to logistics. Atrin replaced Hannah, leaving the expedition team with only 8 men. To boost combat effectiveness somewhat, Lorraine gave Atrin his ivory pistol, alone. After transporting the 2 stern guns to windward camp, the expedition team commandeered an assault boat and, under Atrin's guidance, rowed towards the longship ruins. Not far off, Lorraine spotted the snackajack longship Atrin had described, beneath a steep cliff. It was 17 or 18 meters long and less than 3 meters wide, with a central mast standing about 10 meters tall. The square sail had long since weathered away, leaving only the solitary wooden pole, resembling a tombstone. Admiring the ruins, the expedition team landed. Standing on a protruding reef, Lorraine took a closer look at the largely intact ancient warship. Its construction consisted of oak, which had gradually petrified over the years, yet showed little outward decay. Its hull was sheathed in planks, secured to the hull with long iron rivets. The gaps between the planks were enormous, as the ropes and cords made of animal hair and plant fibers were less resistant to decay than the wood and had long since disappeared. And then there was the famous high, curved bow and stern, meticulously carved from a single piece of oak. A bust of a woman with large eyes and curly hair was carved on the bow, and at the bottom of the figure was inscribed the ancient Icelandic words, Halvig. Lorraine was stunned for a moment, unable to resist taking another look at the exquisitely carved bust. Using his imagination, he whitened her skin, tinted her eyes brown, and dyed her hair black. Faintly, he saw the deceased Helena. This confirmed a suspicion, yet also gave rise to more questions. Helvig was the maternal ancestor of Lorraine's line of whalers, the legendary first wife of Ingvar Arnarsson, King of Iceland. But she wasn't a particularly prominent figure, with no personal legacy, nor did she fit the Viking tradition of using the black dragon Niled and the great serpent Jörmungandr to dazzle the seven seas. Why, then, did she become the figurehead and guardian deity of this ship? Confused, Lorraine continued to examine the hull. The keel was made from a tall, straight oak tree, curved in the middle to increase its load-bearing capacity, while tapering at each end to create a streamlined passage. The ribs were made of solid oak, all sourced from naturally curved wood, meticulously crafted and placed at various points along the keel. The ribs were sheathed in inch-thick planking, made from overlapping oak blocks and riveted to the ribs, leaving long rows of oar holes. While the long oars still remained, the cables, originally made from cedar roots, had long since decayed, loosening the planking and causing some to fall away. At first glance, the ship resembled a withered flower. A defining characteristic of Viking longships was their single, open-air deck, devoid of interior cabins. Through the dislodged planking, Lorraine saw rows of skeletons slumped in the hold, their waists and legs bound by rusted chains. Their faces were horrific, their heads often scattered. They were rowing slaves, 24 in total, and they appeared to have been beheaded en masse. Given the ship's intact structure, Lorraine suspected she hadn't run aground, but had voluntarily run aground. He also found the ship's inscription on the pattern of the keel, Ingolf, King of the Wolf. Ingolf Arnarsson. Lorraine opened his eyes wide in disbelief. He was trying to figure out the facts further when Atrin and several sailors rushed out from the inside of the cliff in a panic. Captain. Great discovery. Major discovery. P.S. Ingolfur Arnarsson, a famous Viking pirate in the 9th century, the discoverer and first ruler of Iceland. His name is Ingolfur Arnarsson. Ingolf means king of the wolf or alpha wolf in Old Icelandic. His wife's name is Helvig, spelled Halvig. P.S. 2. The design of Viking longships has basically not changed over the long centuries. Their classification is mainly based on the number of oarsmen. Similar to using tonnage and displacement to distinguish the levels of ships. If you are listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means it was downloaded and re-uploaded without effort. We warmly invite you to visit our channel, Fanfic World. There you will find the original version of this story and many other novels of various genres. We look forward to seeing you dive into a world of incredible novels. Chapter 62 Foko's Gold Coins. While you were exploring the ruins, I discovered a path. This is it. As he spoke, Atrin led Lorraine forward, skirting a screen-like cliff face and entering a canyon of sea cliffs, only a dozen meters wide but 300 or 400 meters long, curving towards the island's interior. Along the cliff edge lay a precarious plank road, rising and falling, with no obvious signs of human excavation. Its remarkably consistent width made it difficult to rule out the possibility of human intervention. It ascended for over 100 meters, a wet and slippery path that apparently only became visible at low tide. Then, it climbed back up the trough, emerging again from the water to become dry and flat. Lorraine followed Atrin upward, reaching the highest point in the middle of the canyon. After circling a half circle, they finally saw the end of the canyon, a sea cave. A deep cave stood at the end of the canyon, and the undulating plank road stretched deep into the cave, its depths impossible to see. Lorraine squinted and peered inside, seeing only darkness. He whispered to Atrin, "Have you explored inside?" "No, but the sailors found this at the cave entrance." Atrin handed Lorraine a gold coin. It was very old, round in shape. On the front was a bust of a crowned and bearded man, flanked by crosses and bearing the inscription Focus on the left edge. On the back was a winged image of the goddess of victory. In her right hand, she held a long-handled hook, and in her left, a globe with a cross on top. On the left edge, she bore the inscription CTQPIA, Is this a gold coin minted during the reign of the tyrant? Centurion Phocas. Centurion Phocas was an emperor of the Byzantine Empire in the early 7th century, reigning for a brief 8 years between the reigns of Justinian and Heraclius. Originally a noble general, he usurped the throne through a military mutiny, only to be replaced by the Heraclius family in the same manner, failing to establish a true dynasty. This is a piece of obscure history. If it weren't for the fact that many European aristocratic lines trace their lineages back to Rome, and that the heraldry courses required of aristocratic children devoted extensive sections to interpreting the heritage of the Eastern and Western Roman empires, Lorraine would have known nothing about this. Now, not only was he familiar with all this, he also knew that the gold coins minted during the Phocas period, due to their exquisiteness and rich color, had always been highly sought after by collectors and Roman enthusiasts, each one a true treasure. Why would something like this appear outside the Hebisi Sea Cave? A wizard delivering gold coins, the treasure of the King Wolf. Lorraine led his men back to the ruins and sailed back to Windward Camp. The possibility of Ingil Arnesen's treasure within the sea cave made exploring it a dangerous undertaking, and the dangers weren't limited to the exploration itself. He didn't dare to act rashly, so he urgently summoned Kren and Noah and gathered the sailors to discuss the important matter. As night fell, Kren and Acheron, on Lorraine's behalf, announced to the sailors at both camps that they were recruiting volunteers. The expedition team discovered a pirate treasure trove, potentially fraught with danger or potentially enormous profit. Generous President Drake decided to share this joy with every sailor, ensuring that the rewards of the expedition would be shared equally. To ensure equitable distribution, they convened a contract council overnight. Lorraine, representing the Chamber of Commerce, and Kren, representing the seafarers, discussed the distribution of the expedition proceeds with 5 sailor representatives. After several rounds of bargaining, they announced the specific principles for distribution. These principles were fourfold. 1. The Chamber of Commerce would retain ownership of all discovered treasure. 2. The Chamber of Commerce would establish a minimum allowance of £1,000, which would be converted into gold pounds based on the final weight of the haul, with no upper limit. 3. The converted gold pounds would be divided into 4 parts. 50% for the Chamber of Commerce, 20% for all chamber members on Hebisi Island, 20% for the 20 brave individuals who participated in the expedition, and 10% for any casualties sustained during the expedition, a 70%-30% split for. All settlements would be made the day after returning to Southampton, with no default. To demonstrate their sincerity, everyone will sign a sacred spoils-sharing contract based on the aforementioned principles. Lorraine and Pierce, 2 shareholders of the Chamber of Commerce, will serve as Party A, while all others entitled to a share of the spoils will serve as Party B. This is a fair contract for all. Those who profit first receive stable profits, but lack the potential for growth. Those who backstop the project bear the corresponding risks at the startup, but in return receive high profits and the opportunity to enjoy the dividends alone. Uneducated and struggling sailors lack the knowledge and access to the premiums in the high-end collectibles market, and they cannot discern the true value of antique gold. Unlike pistol, according to sailors' social circles, any gold artifact over 300 years old loses its value solely to the gold itself. This contract makes all the difference. Even before the expedition begins, the 125 people on board already share a guaranteed profit of £200, ready to reap the benefits. The 20 who participate, regardless of survival, will each receive at least an additional £10, a substantial bonus equivalent to 4 months' salary. The injured were to share at least £30 in consolation money, something everyone looked forward to. While the deceased were to receive at least £70, no one wanted any. They even had reasonable, uncapped potential for appreciation. So what about Lorraine? If the sea cave truly contained Ingil Arnesen's treasure, millennia of history would elevate these gold artifacts to high-end collectibles, commanding an unparalleled premium in the art world. A standard Phocas gold coin weighed 4.5 grams, equivalent to only 0.6 pounds, but its market value consistently hovered between 60 and 80 pounds. While Lorraine didn't know the details, he knew that gold artifacts from this period typically commanded premiums exceeding 50 times their original value, with those of high artistic value or special historical significance easily fetching 100 times that. Given this premium, he only needed to collect 20 pounds of gold artifacts during his expedition to avoid a loss. The more he found, the greater the profit. The Chamber of Commerce was almost certain to reap all the benefits of this unexpected discovery. This was exactly what Lorraine wanted, to reap the huge profits without creating any potential rifts within his team. He did it. A fair negotiation process. Generous contract terms, and enormous hidden profits. Everyone was delighted with the contract's contents, rushing to sign the sacred agreement. Then, Kren, a qualified Catholic priest, publicly declared the agreement valid, bestowing divinity upon this glittering contract. The selection of the expedition team went smoothly. Lorraine, Henna, Noah, Acheron, a 6-pound cannon, and 16 skilled and strong sailors. They were given the privilege of a night off from duty, enjoying a full meal and drink. At dawn, they would embark on 2 assault boats and enter the sea caves to explore the treasure hidden deep within Hebishi Island. Blind optimism and anticipation permeated the camp, and the adventurers, listening to the waves, fell into a sweet dream. There, only paradise, no danger. Then, the night faded. P.S. The data and basic image of the Foucault's gold coin come from funerary objects unearthed from the tomb of Anpu and his wife in Longmen, Luoyang in 1981. The coin is now in the Luoyang Museum. P.S. 2. Due to the subject matter, there are often some strange or uncommon things in the book. As long as I can find intuitive pictures and descriptions, I will try my best to put them in the surroundings of the comment area. You are welcome to watch, and you are also welcome to supplement and add. Chapter 63, Cave Bat Shadow. Whoosh, whoosh. 2 assault boats, one in front, one in the back, appeared. The bow of the forward boat carried a lightweight 6-pound cannon, loaded with shotgun shells and padded with sandbags. Behind the cannon sat Acheron, along with Lorraine, Henna, and Noya, and 2 rowers at the stern. Compared to the spacious forward boat, the rear boat seemed far more crowded. 14 carefully selected sailors filled the boats, swords wielded at the front and stern, with 4 in the middle rowing. The 2 boats, one in front of the other, slid into the isthmus, following the sheer cliffs of the narrow ridge back to the sea cave. Lorraine stood up, raised his hand, and shouted, "Slow down." Light torches, he and Acheron each lit a torch. 2 sailors in the rear boat also stood up, each holding a torch, illuminating the waters in front and behind. Thus, the expedition slid into the deep sea cave. The cave twisted, deep, and vast, like an endless wave, its course winding through a series of varying lengths, leading into the heart of the island. The air was filled with a pungent, stagnant smell of ammonia, and all around were jagged, jutting rocks that blocked the channel. Halfway through, the cliffside path completely cut off, and daylight could no longer penetrate. Lorraine could only discern a portion of the cave wall by the dim light of his torch. "This is a sea cave," Lorraine said, pointing to the indescribable protrusions on the cave wall. Lavender splashed here, but it didn't close. Perhaps some unusual topography created a crack, and the sea's erosion over time eventually widened the cave to its current size. Henna and Noah were both curious about this new knowledge and eager to hear more from Lorraine. Unfortunately, Acheron, equally experienced and educated, was also on board. The romantic French gentleman shrugged, straining his arms and raising his torch. "I'm only concerned with how long this tunnel is, Captain. We may have advanced a kilometer, perhaps even further, and we haven't seen the end yet. Are you worried it leads outside? You truly can't hide anything from you," Acheron sighed dejectedly. "I'm worried this tunnel will penetrate the entire rock formation and end up in the open air deep in the jungle. After so many years, even the most beautiful gold artifacts will be destroyed by wild beasts. I've heard a saying, what? Speculation is risky. Choose your side carefully," Lorraine said with a smile. "Acheron, your situation is special. At least before we get our reward, you can always switch sides and receive treatment comparable to that of a sailor. I believe this profit-driven change is reasonable. Damn it. You're tempting me." Acheron's position among the seafarers was indeed unique. Lorraine had allocated 30% of the Chamber of Commerce's dividends to the flagship's crew, sharing both their success and their losses. However, Acheron was currently in the process of redemption. According to their employment contract, all his compensation during this period would belong to the Chamber of Commerce, regardless of the amount, and would be used to redeem himself. However, expeditions were not a chamber activity, they were personal, and their rewards and risks were naturally independent of the chamber's profits and losses. Therefore, in theory, Acheron could completely separate himself from the Chamber of Commerce and reap the benefits of his own adventure, just like a sailor embarking on an adventure. The price he would pay would be the temporary or complete loss of his chance to truly join Lorraine's trusted circle. He was an ambitious man, and this ambition made him feel guilty in Lorraine's presence, making him particularly eager for trust. The choice Lorraine presented him with was, frankly, a trade-off between money and social connections. Should he truly integrate into Lorraine's circle? He only hesitated for a moment before gritting his teeth and making a decision. Captain, the gold is tempting, but I choose not to. Lorraine exchanged a meaningful glance with Noah and smiled faintly. Acheron, you won't have to join the Second Fleet after returning to Southampton, huh? Before Acheron could fully appreciate the depth of this temptation, a sudden scream erupted from the boat behind him. A sailor stood up, screamed, and fell into the water. In the dim light of the fire, Lorraine saw dozens of balls of pitch black descend from the sky, clinging to his face and body. He struggled in the water, but only for a moment before ceasing to struggle. The pitch blackness staggered and flew up like drunken gloom, gathering together and emitting a sharp cry, squeak. Countless dim red lights suddenly lit up the cave ceiling, and a blanket of pitch blackness flew out from the shadows of the cave, the sound of its flapping wings mingling like a torrential downpour hitting banana leaves. Acheron was terrified. Vampire bats, protect the rowers. Use torches to scatter them. Lorland reacted with incredible speed. With a clang, he drew his sword with one hand and, with the other, held a torch high, waving it vigorously over the rowers' heads. Speed up. Charge. More torches were lit, and the sailors waved them around in terror, driving back the terrifying vampire bats. The rowers increased their strokes, exerting all their might to swiftly cross the sea of bats. They were mired in a sea of bats. Dark shadows filled the sky and the ground, thousands of vampire bats. Lorland waved a torch in one hand and swung his longsword in the other, slicing at least one bat with each strike. Henna and Noah were even more efficient. One wielded two short knives, the other held a talon between their fingers, their backs pressed together. They not only protected their surroundings but also had enough energy to watch over the two rowers in front of them. Acheron also drove back the bats, standing on the swaying boat and using the flames to drive away the bats that flew towards the boat. Thanks to their preparedness, the lead boat remained unscathed for the time being. But the crowded rear boat was far less prepared. Lorraine issued the order promptly, and they quickly lit 6 torches and began to shoo the bats away. Still, a sailor was caught in a bat bite, screaming as more bats hurled him overboard. In a matter of seconds, 3 men were in the water, and with the missing bat, 4 men were thrown into the water. The rear boat couldn't make it. Lorraine's eyes, bloodshot, severed 2 bats with a single blow and shouted, Acheron! Fire! Acheron instinctively lit the trigger, sparks flying, and he screamed in panic, draw down. Open your mouth. Cover your ears, boom. A deafening roar echoed throughout the cave, and the speeding lead boat faltered, hurtling backward like a cannonball. Lorraine and Noah were both thrown forward. The quick-witted Henna barely had time to grab Noah before Lorraine flew past her and plunged into the water with a thud. Hundreds of crimson bolts illuminated the tunnel, crackling against the hard walls, sending stone dust and debris flying everywhere, wiping out nearly 100 bats at the bow. But the blast had far more to offer. Bats have keen hearing, and the sudden thunderous boom stunned or even killed them. Countless bats rained down, landing in the water, on the boats, and on people, an entire colony wiped out. Lorraine surfaced with a splash, rubbing his ears in agony, enduring the ringing in his ears. Reload the shotgun shells, organize a rescue, we have to get out of here before most of the vampire bats wake up. He wiped the water off his face. Damn it, the fore and aft boats can't be in a straight line anymore. If they collide from recoil, it'll be a disaster. Ugh, changing the input method actually resulted in so many typos. Sorry. I'm catching them fast. Chapter 64 Macaw. This massive vampire bat attack inflicted heavy casualties on the expedition. 4 people fell into the water, while 7 others, including Acheron, survived but sustained varying degrees of injuries. Whether or not they fell into the water seemed to be the defining criterion for the severity of injuries. Those who survived generally suffered minor injuries, while those who did. 2 of the 4 died from excessive blood loss, and the other 2, when they were pulled from the water, were breathing more than they exhaled. It was clear that they were beyond medical help and only a step away from death. The severity of these injuries was primarily due to the hemolytic enzyme in the vampire bat's saliva. This specialized enzyme kills platelets, preventing blood from clotting and facilitating their feeding. Their mutated fangs and feeding habits also create large wounds near blood vessels, further accelerating blood loss. Combined, It was clear that even if Lorraine had immediately aborted the expedition and returned them to the Papillion area, they would not have survived the night. After obtaining their consent, Lorraine ordered their deaths, their belongings collected, and their bodies sunk into the sea, destined for the fate of every sailor. This funeral cast a shadow over everyone's mind, and the fleeting laughter faded. They rowed forward in silence and tranquility for over half an hour before finally hearing the crash of waves. The shore's breakers signaled they had reached the end of the channel. "Pull in the oars," Lorraine's voice echoed through the deep, dark channel, echoing and reaching everyone's ears. Lorraine stood up, treading the swaying planks to the bow, waving his torch at the towering dark figure before him. "Is this a sailboat?" At the end of the channel, they spotted a brig, a standard two-masted, fully rigged, square-rigged frigate, 30 meters long, 8 meters wide, and 5.5 meters high. Her gun ports were closed, and she lay at anchor at the end of the undulating, dark channel, like a silent behemoth crouching at the entrance to hell. This momentarily left Lorraine without a second thought. The standard sailing ship trend emerged only after the mature warship classification system. Its origins can only be traced back to the early to mid-17th century, during the years-long war for naval supremacy between Britain and the Netherlands. During that era, British and Dutch warships engaged in fierce raids on the vast oceans, plundering enemy merchant ships in an effort to cut off their trade routes. Merchant ships could only maintain trade under the escort of warships. To adapt to the speed and formations of fully rigged sailing warships, merchants were forced to abandon their original practice of shipbuilding based on material. A new shipbuilding standard quickly emerged, emphasizing the haphazard construction of near-shore merchant ships and the maximum uniformity of ocean-going merchant ships. It was from this time that the term standard size came into being. A modern-day brig frigate suddenly appeared in a 9th-century treasure cave, its sidelights all dimmed, appearing deserted. Lorraine couldn't help but lick his lips. "Pull over. Noah and I will go aboard first, Hannah will bring up the rear, and Atrin will command the sailors," he ordered softly. The two boats came together, and 4 sailors leaped into the foreboat, while Noah and Hannah took the afterboat. They approached cautiously from both sides, casting their grappling lines. Lorraine was the first to board from the port side, clanking his knife and holding his torch high. A moment later, Noah joined from the starboard side. The two, flanking each other, searched the hold as quickly as possible, but found no one. Everything was neatly stowed away, the anchor chain rusted, and the 4, 6, and 9-pound cannons wrapped in oilcloth were stored in the gun bay. No one was found, living, dead, or even skeletons. In the bulkhead of the captain's cabin, Lorraine discovered a letter of marque, issued by the Kingdom of Ireland in 1659, granting Captain John Nussbaum the right of privateering. All the mysteries were solved. Lorraine returned to the deck with Noah and signaled both sides. Led by the seamen, the sailors boarded the ship and gathered around Lorraine, awaiting orders. Lorraine's voice sounded particularly deep. "Search the entire ship carefully. This is the Macaw, John Nussbaum's missing flagship, the Macaw." The empty cabin was naturally easier to search, especially since the sailors participating in the expedition were all the best on Lorraine's ship. The ship's condition and various discoveries were presented to Lorraine one by one. This ship was indeed the Macaw, the Irish expedition ship that disappeared in the Atlantic 100 years ago. It was a standard rig, fully rigged with 2 masts and square rigs. It was constructed of expensive military timber, century-old oak. Caves are a unique environment with high ammonia content, which is corrosive to wood. Yet, even after a century of unrepaired work, the ship's timbers and keel have remained remarkably well preserved despite their age. However, its sails, cables, and rubber had been thoroughly weathered, requiring meticulous and painstaking care to return it to the ocean. Otherwise, the 28 guns were in excellent condition, mostly small-caliber guns popular a century ago. The main battleships were 9 and 6-pounders, and the main deck and bow and stern guns were even the long obsolete 4-pounders. The 4 anchors were completely destroyed, their capstans and chains rusted to a heap, forcing the anchors to be abandoned in order to sail. Lorraine was almost certain that the Macaw's crew had left the ship in good condition. Every compartment was neatly arranged, with important items such as charts, the captain's journal, an octant, and a navigational compass carefully stored in oilskin wrappings. The sailors also discovered approximately 18 pounds worth of gold, silver, and copper coins. Lorraine didn't take a penny, distributing them directly to the expedition sailors. They also discovered a sealed crew cabin belonging to the captain of the assault boat who had died during the voyage. His weapons, including 2 Dublin muskets and a high-quality, gleaming silver rapier, had been collected as relics. These were Atrin's first harvest, and Atrin beamed with joy. 100 years of solitude, there were only so many usable items left on the ship, and Lorraine had made a killing. First, the ship. Lorraine could undoubtedly tow it out of the cave. Whether he could bring it back to Southampton depended on whether Crone could restore her to seafaring status under the current conditions. Second, the charts. Nusbert's charts showed a well-established high-latitude transatlantic route from Ireland to the West Indies, effectively opening up a route to the New World for Lorraine. Third, Nusbert's logbook. Disregarding the code word, Lorraine found a complete account of Hebushi's expedition. Nusbert and his crew had visited the island twice, not only exploring the entire island but also personally witnessing the ancient treasures hidden within the caves. He called the caves magicians who loved to give gold coins to sailors. However, the wizards weren't as friendly as he claimed. During his first landing, a riot broke out on his ship over the uneven distribution of the spoils. Nusbert managed to suppress the riot, killing many but suffering serious injuries himself. The macaw suffered heavy losses and lost the ability to continue exploring. It had to leave the island with a heart full of regrets and scars, until it revisited the old place 2 years later. The diary ended here. Nasperth did not record the results of the second exploration in it, but the macaw had been lurking in the sea cave like a ghost for 100 years, which had revealed the result of the second expedition to Lorraine. The whole army was wiped out. Lorraine closed the diary and tied the oilcloth tightly. Hannah's emerald eyes looked at him, and her eyes were full of exploration. From here you can go directly to the treasure trove. It is well preserved, dry and closed. Lorraine pondered for a moment, and whispered to Hannah, there may be huge unknown risks on the way. Nasperth took 40 sailors in, but not one of them came out. Chapter 65, Unknown Reason for the Group's Destruction. The launch docked at the end of the channel, tying up to the silent macaw. Sailors took turns landing, shouting slogans as they unloaded the lightest 4-pounder from the macaw. This was a last-minute plan Lorraine had come up with after predicting the fate of Nasperth's crew. Before then, no one had considered the risk of pushing a cannon like a clumsy soldier. In theory, it was a foolish decision. To achieve longer range and a more stable trajectory from a swaying ship, naval guns were typically larger, more sophisticated, and heavier than land-based artillery. Take, for example, a 6-pounder of the same class. A 6-pounder for land warfare often weighed less than a ton and came with a lightweight carriage, while a seagoing 6-pounder weighed 2 tons. Even the lightest, shortest-barreled 6-pounder aboard the Papalinas, the one Lorraine had chosen for the boat, weighed a respectable 1.2 tons. The thought of carrying such a massive load through the rugged sea caves was simply unrealistic. However, the macaw offered Lorraine a different option. Its aft gun bay held 6 perfectly preserved 4-pounder cannons, weighing a mere 0.7 tons. The bay also contained a convenient transport carriage, a small, deck-mounted cart, that made it possible to carry the guns on such an adventure. There was also ammunition of appropriate caliber. Shotgun shells, solid bullets, chain shot, the iron shells, coated in dried ointment, were neatly stacked beside the guns. The only drawback was that the propellant stored in the lower hold had deteriorated. Fortunately, Lorraine had 6 supplies of propellant with him, and by repackaging them according to the caliber of the 4-pounder cannons, he easily created 8. Atrin, with his expertise, had calculated the rock hardness of the sea cave walls and determined that the 4-pound shotgun shells would not collapse them. Thus, Lorraine's plan was approved, adding a significant asset to the expedition's success. 20 men remained in the expedition. To effectively maneuver the cannon, Lorraine assigned 4 men to push and pull the carriage, 2 to push the ammunition, and Atrin to assist in maneuvering the gun. They formed a luxurious artillery crew of 7, stationed in the center of the formation. The remaining sailors were assigned their respective positions. Lorraine and Noel led 5 sailors to clear the way, while Hannah and 5 sailors formed the rear, guarding the retreat. While unloading the cannon and distributing the ammunition, the sailors reviewed the preparations repeatedly. Convinced that they were fully prepared, Lorraine swung a torch and whispered, "Let's go." The cave was silent. The dome, unshaded by the rising foundation, had not risen. Illuminated by a dozen torches, the previously unlit ceiling became clear. At only about 3 meters high, it seemed within reach for Lorraine. The cave was narrowing. The waterway, initially 14 or 15 meters wide, now dwindled to a mere 5 or 6 meters between its walls. The expedition team could now clearly see their surroundings, as well as the numerous branching holes, some deep, some shallow, some barely wide enough for a person to pass through, others impenetrable even to a cat. Lorraine clutched Atron's newly acquired rapier. In this cramped environment, his combat effectiveness was greatly diminished. He couldn't jump, had nowhere to hide, and couldn't even use his long sword, his specialty. His height, arm length, and sword length made it impossible to use them in such a situation. Cannons, obviously, couldn't be fired either. He felt like he'd walked into a giant anthill, even beginning to delude himself into thinking that the culprit behind the annihilation of Nasport's group was some kind of prehistoric ant, some mighty large. That's not possible, is it? He reassured himself with uncertainty, even as he proceeded with increased caution, especially regarding the branching holes, large and small. He had to thoroughly explore them before venturing through them. They walked anxiously for half an hour, encountering no danger. Lorraine raised his hand. Rest here, the second group will keep watch. The team stopped at his command and gathered together. 4 sailors left the team, 2 in front and 2 in the back, each holding a fire and a knife. Lorraine opened the water bag and took a sip of water. Noah approached him and asked softly, "Captain, what do you think the danger is?" "I don't know." Lorraine shook his head. "Ingel Arnarsson is my blood ancestor, a 9th century Viking. Judging from the size of the long ship and the executed rowing slaves, even if he buried the treasure deep in the cave, he didn't have the manpower to make a trap that could run for 1,000 years, but the explorers' team was wiped out. Could it be another riot? A riot is not impossible, but it is almost impossible for everyone to perish in a riot and no one to escape. Most of the time, there will always be a winner in a rebellion. Beasts. To wipe out a team of 40 people who specialize in exploration, the beasts in the cave must either live in groups or be extremely huge. As Atron said, if there were such beasts that used the treasure as a nest, how could the gold artifacts be preserved? Lorraine smiled bitterly. Don't forget, Nasporth is not an ancient man. He arrived only 100 years earlier than us. But he saw the treasures with his own eyes and almost took them away. Noah was also bewildered. The two of them discussed the matter for a long time, unable to come to a conclusion. Just as they were about to ask Henna and Atron for any new insights, something unexpected happened. The sailor standing sentry at the front of the group suddenly screamed. He fell flat on his back, sliding toward a nearby branch hole, as if being dragged by a mysterious force, powerless to resist. Then, screams echoed from the back of the group. Ina, quick-witted, flung a flying knife and shouted, "Lorraine, ankle, ankle!" Lorraine leaped forward without a second thought. As he ran, the longsword at his waist suddenly unsheathed, whirling like a steel wheel, passing between the sailor and the center of the branch hole. Puff! The sailor stopped dead in his tracks. His fellow sentry ran over and dragged his terrified teammate back to the main group. Lorraine picked up a fallen torch and swung it toward the branch hole, illuminating the distant landscape. The attacker was a massive lizard, over 3 meters long, with a ferocious, triangular head. Its body was a dark brown, its skin rough. Its body was covered in bumps, resembling scales, but without scales. Swinging its thick tail, it slowly emerged from the branch cave, its eyes, huge as copper bells, fixed on Lorraine, its sharp claws sending streaks of sparks through the rocky ground. Komodo, monitor. Lorraine raised his rapier in alarm. He saw more monitors approaching the firelight. 5 ahead of the team, from the dome, from the rock face, from the branch cave. He also heard the sailors at the rear shouting that 4 had been spotted from behind. Atron, the cave is too small, don't fire, he whispered, barely audible to Atron. Noah, make quick work. Before he'd finished, Lorraine lunged forward, taking a single stride before the lizard, its tongue severed. His rapier stabbed at its eyes like lightning. The monitors were no slower than him. The moment Lorraine started, the 5 giant lizards started at the same time. They leaped towards Lorraine with a speed completely disproportionate to their length, swishing their claws forward and lashing their tails left and right. Those crawling upside down on the dome flung their long tongues at Lorraine, like rapiers, shooting straight for Lorraine's throat. But Lorraine remained unfazed. He lunged at the target with his sword, his free left hand half drawn out his long knife, holding it horizontally against his side with the blade's back. Noya unleashed her silver tarot cards like a shower of flowers, dozens of them whirling past Lorraine, severing the long tongues above his head, and with a clang of clinking, neutralized a sweeping blow from his tail. With a bang, Atron fired his musket. Amidst the smoke, the fiery lead bullet struck a giant lizard squarely in the body, sending it flying half a meter. A giant lizard's claws slammed into Lorraine's long knife. There was a clang, and Lorraine grunted. Almost instantly, the rapier in his hand pierced the target's eyeball, piercing its skull with a flick. The target's claws stopped less than 20 centimeters from Lorraine's side, limp and powerless, falling to the ground. Lorraine suddenly drew his sword, spun sideways, and used the handheld position to guide the long knife, slashing diagonally at the second target in front of him. Kill. Chapter 66, Middle Block. With a loud shout, the sharp long knife slid across the monitor lizard's front paw, but only left a shallow scratch. The monitor lizard was covered with tough thick skin, and the hard protrusions were only the size of soybeans. They were hard and dense, which could offset the sharp chopping and blunt impact of sharp weapons to the maximum extent, making it an almost impenetrable defense. Without thinking, Lorraine kicked the monitor lizard's neck, pushing it back and avoiding a sweeping tail, but the second round of attacks from the other 3 monitor lizards also arrived, and he had to fly back. The sharp claws scraped sparks on the rocks, and the thick tails broke the wind. The sailors in the front team shouted and rushed over. 2 or 3 people in a group passed Lorraine and took away 2 lizards. Atron's second shot sounded at the right time, pointing upwards, and a shot blew out the left eye of the dome monitor lizard. The monitor lizard fell beside Lorraine. Lorraine raised his sword and pierced its eye socket, picked it up, and cut off another one. He took 2 deep breaths. Atron, get your gunner to help you with your guns. Noah, go help Henna. The situation in the rear was far more critical than in the front. Henna was formidable. In the eyes of the Drake Chamber of Commerce employees, her combat prowess was no less than Lorraine's, and her killing efficiency was even superior. This was the glory of the assassins. However, the unique nature of the assassins' killing techniques made Henna unsuitable for a battle leader. Her weapon was short, fast, and erratic. She couldn't stand before the sailors like Lorraine, nor could she act as a shield to buy her companions a moment to breathe. At the outset of the battle, Henna broke into run, stomping along the rock face, leaping onto the dome. With a deflection, she landed on the last lizard, raised her 2 blades, and stabbed it in the eye, killing it with a single blow. The sailors in the rear, in a panic, bore the first wave of the lizard's attack. One sailor was knocked down by a lizard's attack, its tongue piercing his cheek. Another sailor, struck by the lizard's tail, flew backward, spitting blood, his swollen chest hollowed. Only the third lizard's attack was in vain, its claws swishing away narrowly avoided by the sailor, and the sailor's counterattack, even with his knife, was ineffective. After 1 round of death, 3 lizards remained, and only 4 humans remained in the rear. Noah arrived just in time, her silver tarot flying out like a flower, clanging and deflecting the second attack of 2 lizards. Henna seized the opportunity, leaping onto the back of one of them and repeating the same trick, securing another victory. This time, it was a 1-for-1 exchange, and Noah's silver tarot aimed at all 3 targets, but it had no effect on the giant lizards. The sailors were devastated. 3 were killed in a short period of time, and the remaining 2 sailors rushed frantically at the last lizard, only to have one's tail swipe away, and the other's leg severed by its claws. Henna pursed her lips and engaged one of the monitors. Noah gritted her teeth and ran forward, holding tarot in her arms, dancing with another. Lorraine, aided by 3 sailors, stabbed the third lizard to death, then with a mighty kick, used its corpse to knock the fourth away. The front line stabilized. He panted and sprinted, taking a sweeping blow against the back of his blade. His rapier swung out as he flew backward, killing the fourth. With a thud, Lorraine slammed into the solid rock, then rolled back toward the increasingly dangerous rear. Atron, the last one is yours. The brief but fierce battle ended after a few minutes. With Lorraine joining the rear, Henna freed her hands to slay the last 2 monitors. In the front, Atron, with the cooperation of 5 brave sailors, took turns firing 3 muskets, nearly shattering the skin of the remaining monitor, finally driving it away. The casualties of the expedition were concentrated in the rear. Of the 5 sailors, 3 dead and 2 wounded, no one escaped unscathed. Lorraine and Noah were nearly exhausted. After cleaning up the battlefield and collecting their weapons, they had no strength left to fight again. It was clear that they were no longer in a position to advance. They gathered the remains of the fallen, left the cannons and ammunition in the cave, and freed the gun carriage to load the wounded and the bodies of the 2 monitor lizards back to the macaw for rest and recuperation. After their strength had mostly recovered, Hannah gazed curiously at the 2 monitor lizards on deck and asked Lorraine, "Are you bringing them back for food? Their hides are very tough." "I plan to make each of us an arm guard that can almost serve as a shield. Why not just make a shield? Do any of us know how to use a shield?" The pleasant conversation fizzled out. Team morale was strong. After all, exploring pirate treasure in the mysterious Habashi caves, everyone expected to die. And considering the harvest, the current casualties were relatively low. Lorraine had already promised that if Kren thought the macaw was worth bringing back and could successfully enter the port of Southampton, the Chamber of Commerce would pay £3,000 for this old, dilapidated ship. This was a reasonable estimate and a reasonable prerequisite. Halfway through the repairs, Lorraine saw that the 2 injured hides stabilized and announced the end of the first round of the expedition. He towed the macaw back to the East Coast beach. Crash! The sailors pried off the rusty anchor chain, and the macaw, which had been anchored for over 100 years, slowly drifted away from the shore. Hannah steered the ship, and Noah controlled the bowgun to guard against vampire bats along the way. Lorraine and Acheron, each with 5 sailors, rowed a small boat to tow the stern, pulling the huge brig out of the sea cave and arriving at the East Coast beach, where Kren was at a turtle's pace under the setting sun. Lorraine leaped from the assault boat, treading the water as he shouted to Crone, "The boat has no anchor." Crone, "Gather the sailors and prepare to tie up. Oh my God. Have you sneaked into the palace of the sea god?" As night fell on the East Coast beach, Lorraine sat in front of a bonfire, stirring the flames intermittently, his expression distorted. Crone was leading a comprehensive assessment of the macaw's usefulness. The results were crucial, potentially determining whether a second sea cave expedition would be undertaken. Without the right incentives, the sailors would retreat. To be the first to learn the results, Lorraine stayed behind. Aside from him, the rest of the expedition team, seamen, sailors, the wounded, and monitor lizards, had been relocated to the better-equipped Windward camp. It was spacious, comfortable, well-stocked with water, and a vibrant atmosphere. Compared to the cramped, cluttered East Coast beach, it was clearly a better fit for the wounded and weary sailors. Unfortunately, Lorraine's arm guard was temporarily lost. The son of a skilled tanner came specially to tell Lorraine about a process Lake had once used to process a rhinoceros hide. This naturally heavy armor was not suitable for primitive crafting. It required a special and meticulous tanning process to enhance its softness and shape without compromising its defensive properties. For now, all they could do was peel the hide as completely as possible, clean off any broken flesh and membranes, and wrap it with oilcloth to protect it from moisture. But these were minor matters. Lorraine's real concerns now lay in 2 matters: when the Papillon could be repaired and whether the macaw could successfully sail. The former dictated the timing of their return to Europe, the latter the rewards of this expedition. When the moon reached its zenith, a weary Kren finally appeared before Lorraine. "This macaw is a gift from God. Otherwise, Jörn George stole her from Noten," he said. Chapter 67 Fluorescent Cave. After a master craftsman's assessment, the macaw was in remarkably good condition. Its structure was sound, its material strong. She looked nothing like a century-old old woman, more like a vessel 30 or 40 years old, simply neglected. Lorraine lacked expertise in materials science, but from what Crone had said, it seemed the result was a special oxide film on the hull. This coating covered all exposed planking, thinner above the waterline and thicker below. This film insulated the wood from ammonia corrosion, slowing its aging and ensuring it was always seaworthy. Of course, this didn't mean the macaw needed repairs. Small iron parts on the ship were severely corroded. Crone's plan was to replace parts like the cable buckles and mastheads, where spares were readily available on the Iris, and to borrow 2 anchors from the Iris. The brig and brigantine were similar ships, each with 4 anchors, with 2 remaining to allow them to anchor safely in calm waters, such as Hebrides Island or at major ports in various countries. The rivets securing the hull were now useless, but thanks to the membrane, the macaw's rivets could still withstand several more rounds of repairs. As long as there were no storms or battles along the way, it could be returned to Southampton for a major overhaul and replacement. The successful resolution of the iron and wood issues meant that 80% of the ship's problems were resolved. The rest were minor matters. Waterproofing glue was not a problem, and the Butterfly had sufficient supplies of cables. As for the sails, Kren's plan was to remove the butterfly's 2 wind-catching sails and replace them with bow sails, which would provide the maquas with some wind-cutting ability. The butterfly's square sail was a 3-sail system, retaining only the lower large sail and transferring the middle square sail to the maquas to form the downwind side. The upper square sail was split diagonally in 2 and converted into 2 mizzen sails to increase the ship's speed. Such adjustments would significantly reduce the use of cables. Kren predicted that upon completion, the maquas would be able to reach speeds of 5 knots with a tailwind and 3.5 knots against a headwind in the Atlantic, more than enough to keep up with a sailless Patchy, forming a line and sailing back to Britain. Lorraine was overjoyed and entrusted the task of refitting the ship to his trusted master craftsman, immediately sending the good news back to windward. The first round of sea cave exploration yielded a profit of £3,000. The excited sailors, forgetting the tragic casualties, began the second round of selection that very night at windward. This time, Lorraine wanted 28 men. In 3 days, the new expedition team would return to the sea caves in the repaired maquas to seize the pirate treasure, which had been confirmed to exist. In a flash, the Patchy's repairs were well underway, and 40% of them were complete. The maquas, its sails wrecked beyond recognition, slowly pulled away from the shore, carrying the high-spirited expedition team. Riding the wind and firing their cannons, they startled the swarms of bats and returned to the end of the waterway. The warship dropped anchor. This time, Lorraine brought more men, pushing 3 gun carts and carrying 20 packs of powder, which could be used directly as explosives, rather than the cannons. The long procession, torches lit, returned to the spot where they had encountered the monitor lizard. The monitor's carcass was gone, as were the bodies of the sailors left behind. Only the light cannon and the shells remained intact, stacked together, exactly as they had been 3 days earlier. Lorraine knew that Komodo dragons are scavengers and cannibals. This change proved that the monitor lizards they had encountered were not the only inhabitants of the sea cave. Perhaps they had kin, or perhaps there were predators within the cave that were equally powerful, or even more powerful. Lorraine raised his arm. Rest, reload the guns. 3 groups stand sentry. Don't stray too far from the main group. That battle seemed to have had an effect. Animals are far more sensitive than humans. In a nearly closed environment like a sea cave, Komodo dragons, if not at the top of the food chain, are certainly the dominant force upstream. They attacked the newcomers, sacrificing 8 adult Komodo dragons for only 3 kills. This was enough for the ecosystem to rank humans, and most likely, it would be above the dragons. Thinking of this, Lorraine felt a surge of confidence. After resting, the team continued on, slowly passing the tunnel's narrowest point. From there, the tunnel widened. Noah followed closely behind Lorraine, warily observing the increasingly dark cave walls. "Captain, do you feel it's getting warmer in the cave?" "A little." Lorraine tugged at his collar. "Lizards are cold-blooded. Without warmth, their desire to move decreases, and they won't be so aggressive." "Really?" Noah's large eyes twinkled with curiosity. "Captain, how do you know everything?" "Basic biology." Lorraine shrugged helplessly. "Kren and Atcherin know that, too." "I know. Humility is a gentleman's virtue." Noah nodded earnestly. "Captain, there's no light in the cave, so why is it getting hot?" "Probably. We're heading towards a volcano." "Volcano." As the two chatted, the team turned a sharp curve and suddenly the view before them lit up. They entered a flat, spacious cave. Over 10 meters high, egg-shaped, like a theater, its widest point 30 or 40 meters. Inside, clumps of unusual, luminous plants, some red and some green, filled the cave with a bizarre, dreamlike hue. The light was faint, barely enough to sustain them, but the sailors had been navigating the pitch-black cavern for so long that, save for the tiny orange-red glow of the torches, they had long since acclimated to the endless darkness. The sudden appearance of light and the clear view of the cavern brought a sense of relief. Lorraine stared in disbelief. "Are these glow mushrooms?" "Glow mushrooms are a unique species that spontaneously glow when they sprout. They are fungi and inedible." This was a strange trivia tip Lorraine had learned from the Avidar in his previous life. He knew the fact, but not the reason. The sudden appearance of this rare species in Hebeshi naturally astonished Lorraine. Noah, beside him, was captivated by the beauty before them and moved closer. They had only taken a few steps when they were pulled aside by Hina, who had arrived ahead of them. "Hina, beauty often harbors danger." Hina pointed to a patch of glow mushrooms not far away. At least those monitor lizards don't dare come here. Through her, Lorraine and Noah saw that the patches of glow mushrooms were often filled with skeletons. Most were animals, with the occasional human head. Hidden in the brightest parts of the cave. They loomed faintly, barely visible. If it weren't for Henna's sharp eyes, even Lorraine would have nearly missed them. And indeed, he did. More accurately, aside from Henna, no one in the expedition team noticed the danger lurking within. Everyone was mesmerized by the unparalleled beauty before them. At least 10 sailors were heading toward the glowing mushrooms, the closest practically thrusting their hands into the glow. Everyone, stay away. Cover your faces. No contact, Lorraine shouted to the team. His voice was quick, but not fast enough for the nimble, unsuspecting sailors. 2 sailors had already reached into the glow, and upon hearing Lorraine's words, they froze. Ah! A scream erupted. The sailors, their hands in the glow, staggered backward, their arms tangled with a colorful ribbon. After a few steps, they fell to the ground, convulsing. The ribbons detached from their arms and slithered toward the next sailor. With 2 sharp clashes, Henna's red velvet throwing knife pinned one, while Noah's silver tarot sliced the other in 2. It's a coral snake. Henna quickly drew a new throwing knife. They're scared, I'm scared too. Lorraine yanked out both of his knives with a clang, then spread his arms wide, slowly retreating to protect the sailors behind him. Hundreds of colorful ribbons emerged from the shrouds of light, each only 50 or 60 centimeters long, slender and beautiful. They closed in on the expedition team from all sides, closing in on them. Most held their triangular heads high, hissing and spitting out their bright red tongues. This was a sign of an impending attack. Lorraine, Noah, and Henna formed a V-shape, each protecting their companions. But even they were terrified by the hundreds of snake stares, and there was no hope of escaping. What's more, even if they fought their way out of this cave, what would they do when they returned? Atron. Fire into the open field, quick. Atron's face flushed red. What if? Captain, what if we can't scare them away? If we can't scare them away, the Drake Chamber of Commerce can change its name to the Addis Chamber of Commerce. Fire. Chapter 68 London Bridge falls down. Fire, surrounded by coral snakes, renowned for their venom and beauty, Lorraine's cry resounded with remarkable force. He was filled with fear. Though his voice sounded steady and steady, he could sense the gaze of the abyss in the eyes of those dazzling, striped snakes. With a startling command, Atron instinctively ignited the trigger, and a swarm of venomous snakes sprang up, hurling themselves like arrows towards the expedition members. Lorraine, undeterred, charged forward, swinging his long sword at the advancing serpents. The sharp blade reflected the flames, leaving an X-shaped afterglow in his pupils. With a single strike, he severed 7 or 8 snakes in front of him. The severed heads still bare their fangs. Snakes were not creatures to be ended by a simple slash. Throwing knives and silver talismans whizzed past Lorraine, each one scattering with precision, striking the deadly snake heads to the ground. Lorraine knelt on one knee, staring intently at the venomous snakes that hadn't yet sprung up. He listened to the screams of the sailors behind him and roared in anger. Kill, boom, a deafening roar. The 4-pounder roared, its thunderous boom echoing through the echoing gallery structure of the cave, ringing in Lorraine's ears. He thought his eardrums were ruptured. He turned back, swallowing the sharp sound, and saw the double image of Henna and Noah overlap, covering their ears, crouching, mouths open, faces etched with pain. The sailors looked even worse than the men, stumbling and grimacing. Lorraine couldn't even tell how many had been bitten by the snakes in this round of attacks. But at last, the desperate had managed to survive. The roar of the cannon scared off the snakes, and they fled in panic. In Lorraine's double image, they shone like streaks of light in a dim cave. Some burrowed back into the light, vanishing without a trace. Others swerved, slipping past its edge and scrambling along the smooth cave wall. Not a single snake swam toward the 2 openings. The tunnel's edges seemed to be bounded by invisible lines, each streak of light automatically evading them. In their panic, they preferred repeatedly falling from the smooth cave wall to escaping into the distance through the lightless tunnel. This gave Lorraine a strange illusion. This small dome-shaped cavern felt more like a cage than a den for coral snakes. He steadied himself, leaning on his knife, swaying, hissing, "Check your companions, gentlemen, those bitten by snakes, bleed them and rescue them. If rescue fails, free them. We only have 1 minute." He took a deep breath, not caring how many people could hear him. Noah. I hope the witch's clock in her head hasn't been set off by this cannonball. The inspection and first aid were completed as quickly as possible. In total, 3 sailors were bitten, plus the 2 who had alarmed the snakes, for a total of 5 poisoned, and 2 rescued. The expedition abandoned their companions, panicked and stumbling, twisting and turning, towards the nearby tunnel. No one dared to approach the light along the way. Only when the world beyond the firelight returned to darkness and the sailors could no longer see the enchanting glow of the fluorescent light did Lorraine breathe a sigh of relief and slump against the wall. Rest, the command echoed like a heavenly voice. The sailors, seasick from their long stay on land, collapsed in a heap, the sound of retching echoing. Amidst the retching, someone asked quietly, "We've escaped here, but how are we going back? If we can get here, we can get back." The braver ones gritted their teeth. "If we can't get through, let's clear the way with the cannons and blow those damn snakes away." This was the quintessential English sailor, greedy and fearless. Lorraine sighed with emotion. Being able to hear the sailors' conversations indicated that his tinnitus had mostly subsided. Although for him, the long, humming sound still persisted, he could compare and judge. Risking the cannons had been an utterly foolish decision. Every time they fired in the sea cave, it felt like torture. The immense sound waves, with nowhere to vent, were amplified by resonance and echoes, inflicting damage of 300 casualties while injuring 8,000 of their own. Lorraine worried that if he continued bombarding, the gold might be found by a group of deaf people. But without their cannons, most of them wouldn't even have had the chance to become deaf, having been killed by the wild beasts long ago. Nasport's group was completely annihilated. What had caused the destruction? A giant lizard? A venomous snake? Or perhaps some other danger lurking ahead, one they hadn't yet encountered? Lorraine didn't dare to be complacent. After waiting for a full half hour, seeing the team regain their composure, Lorraine stood up, leaning against a cave wall, and ordered the expedition to continue. The sailors followed Lorraine without complaint, torches in hand, in silence, forming a long line through the deep tunnel. The cave was growing warmer, a noticeable warmth tangible against the walls, though not scorching. Lorraine suspected a hot spring vein beyond the stone wall, but the dry walls, devoid of any trace of water, wouldn't let him verify his suspicions. Frowning, he asked, "Acheron, are the walls thinning?" "Thinning." Acheron drew his musket and tapped lightly against the wall with the butt, hearing a hollow, resonant sound. His face suddenly turned ugly. He squatted down and carefully knocked on the ground again. It was still the same strange, rumbling sound. "Captain, I'm afraid your sixth intuition is right. This rock wall is as thin as an eggshell and is not on the solid ground at all." He took a breath and said in a trembling voice, "If my guess is correct, we are drilling a pipe right now, dozens of people, pushing an iron lump weighing more than a ton, drilling a stone pipe that may collapse at any time." Lorraine shrugged. "So? Do you want to suggest that I leave the cannon here, or order the expedition team to speed up and get out of this pipe as soon as possible?" "Neither." Yatrin's face was pale orange in the firelight. "Logically speaking, a stone pipe of this thickness and length cannot bear the weight of a 4-pound cannon. Since nothing has happened now, I think we'd better maintain the status quo and rationally pretend that nothing happened. There is no need to specifically inform the sailors. Great minds think alike." Lorraine got his answer, his face expression unchanged. He even solemnly comforted his gunner. "Acheron, no matter how thin the rock wall here is, it's still thicker than London Bridge. Since London Bridge has stood on the Thames since the 10th century, this tunnel won't collapse easily. I hope your optimism is as accurate as your sixth sense. After all, no one has ever tried to enclose London Bridge before, and then fire a cannon from inside. Never will. The English don't want London Bridge to be in danger." Lorraine smiled playfully. "Do you know why France, with a much larger population and land area than Britain, has never been able to conquer the British Isles? Why? You always tend to assume the worst, which is why you are cynical, live for the moment, and lack the courage to challenge and explore." Lorraine patted Acheron on the shoulder. "Be optimistic. Believe in your God, my friend. Optimistic. Let's go find our treasure." Lorraine turned around confidently, his face suddenly darkening. Damn it. The artillery was completely useless. P.S. London Bridge, built by the Romans in 50 AD, was the first bridge over the Thames. After being damaged, rebuilt, and collapsed, it was converted into a stone bridge in the 12th century. This bridge embodies the emotions of the British. In the 20th century, when the old bridge was about to collapse, British people of all ages sang a children's song called London Bridge is Falling Down, which became very popular. But the old bridge did not collapse in the end. In 1968, when the stone bridge was about to celebrate its 600th birthday, it was sold to an American businessman at a high price as an antique and shipped across the ocean to the United States. The British used the money from the sale of the bridge to build a completely unremarkable new bridge 100 meters away from the original site, still called London Bridge. How should I put it? A very strange operation. If you really like it that much, it would be great to protect it as a cultural relic. If you are listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means it was downloaded and re-uploaded without effort. We warmly invite you to visit our channel, Fanfic World. There you will find the original version of this story and many other novels of various genres. We look forward to seeing you dive into a world of incredible novels. Chapter 69: The End of the Sea Cave. Slowly, silently, and steadily, the expedition team walked through the water pipe for about 15 minutes before reaching a new cave. The pitch-black entrance, its contents invisible, resembled a ferocious beast with its maw wide open, ready to devour the entire world, quietly awaiting food to fill its belly. The team paused at the cave entrance. Acheron, check the walls here to see if they were the same as the tunnel. Don't alert the others. Acheron nodded silently. Lorraine and Hannah took 2 torches from the sailors, each holding them high, and walked side by side into the cave. In the torchlight, Lorraine saw the smooth, almost milky white rock walls, still in the egg-shaped, echoing gallery-like shape. However, this cave was much larger than the previous fluorescent cave. Standing at the entrance, with only 4 torches, it was impossible to make out the inside. They walked along the wall, and soon they saw a man-made structure on the wall. It was a torch, supported by a crude iron frame against the stone wall. The oilcloth covering the torch was charred, as if it had been burned, but not completely consumed. Hannah, do we have kerosene? We've got some, just in case. 2 sailors made some linen to wrap around the torches. I have a feeling we've reached the end. Lorraine's needs were quickly met. The sailor carefully wrapped the oilcloth around the torches and, with a flick of the torch, lit the entire cavern. They split up in 2 directions, one on each side, tracing the cavern walls. They lit a total of 48 torches, illuminating the vast, theater-like cavern. Lorraine saw a white cavern. The walls were white, and so was the center. The white center was a gentle, nearly 3-meter-high dune of quartz sand, scattered with scattered gold coins and gold objects, becoming denser as one went higher. At the top of the dune, the gold objects had formed a continuous mass. Amidst the vast expanse of gold sat a strange, antique wooden chair with a tall, carved pillar. Atop the chair sat a skeleton, atop a golden helmet and a long sword at his waist. His legs were spread, his back bent forward. His left palm rested on his left knee, his left foot planted on gold. His right arm rested on his right leg, slightly elevated, his foot resting on a massive, sinister-looking ballista. The skeleton of a giant bear flanked the throne, its limbs bent and its head tilted to one side in a state of repose. 4 other sturdy, silver-helmeted skeletons knelt beneath the throne, facing the king and the bear. They had committed suicide, their decayed remains now, their skeletal chests pierced by rusted Viking swords. Hannah stared at all this blankly, her emerald eyes filled with confusion. Is this the king's tomb? This is the burial place of Ingol Arnarsson, Lorraine whispered. My ancestor, Ingol Arnarsson, the Wolf King of Iceland. How did you know? Lorraine raised his hand and pointed to the tall carved pillar like a flagpole behind the throne. Do you see that pillar? It's called the throne pillar. For the Vikings in the tribal period, it was a symbol of power for the tribal leader. The chiefs placed the pillar behind their thrones, and placed the thrones on their longships, sailing across the oceans and plundering wealth. Legend has it that Ingol's longship sailed near Iceland, and his pillar fell from the ship. According to Viking tradition, the place where the pillar landed was where the tribe settled. So he followed the ocean current to find the pillar, found Iceland, and became the king of Iceland. After him, his family ruled Iceland for 3 centuries. Every king used Ingordon's name as his surname, and they were called the Ingordon dynasty. It was not until Iceland was conquered by Norway that the descendants who had lost their authority restored the surname Arnarsson, until my mother Helena Arnarsson, passed the bloodline to me, Lorraine narrated slowly. Unknowingly, the members of the expedition gathered behind him, looking at the king's wolf on the top of the sand dune with reverence and awe. Hannah asked softly, You knew he was here a long time ago? How is that possible? Lorraine smiled bitterly when Yetrin discovered the remains of the longship and the Foucault's gold coins. I just suspected that Inger used this sea cave as his final burial place. But I never thought that he would build such a crazy tomb here. Build, white sand, gold objects, and stone troughs surrounding the cave wall. Lorraine looked at the layout of the cave in confusion. He wanted to build a ship city, Newton. But for some reason, he was ultimately unable to move his longship in. Instead, it became the remains of the longship outside the cave, which became a clue for us and Nasperth to find his tomb. Every sip and every bite is God's will. Henna sighed. What are you going to do? What do you mean? Henna pointed to the king wolf on the sand dunes. This is the tomb of your ancestors. You're overthinking it, Lorraine said, stretching his back with a laugh. I respect Ing. But I'm the descendant of pirates. Even if Ing awakens and stands before me, he can't stop me from taking the treasure. My sailors deserve it. They paid with their lives for it. This was a formal declaration. The expedition erupted in cheers as the sailors swarmed the dunes and began collecting the scattered gold artifacts. The artifacts were a complex mix, ranging from artwork dating back to the 1st centuries BC to common gold coins and ritual vessels from the 8th and 9th centuries. There was no system at all, a stark contrast to Ing's plundering career. They had no chests to store the gold. The few wooden chests atop the pile of gold had long since decayed with age, rotting at the slightest tug. The sailors dumped out medicine bags, ammunition, and even kerosene, freeing up 2 large wooden chests and a barrel to place on the gun carriage used as a pushcart to collect the gold. Someone even suggested unloading the guns, freeing up another carriage to load more gold, but this suggestion was rejected by their more sensible companions. Some people stripped off their clothes, bundled them up, and wrapped themselves in heavy gold, their excitement overwhelming. But from beginning to end, no one touched the remains of the 4 Viking warriors, let alone disturbed the peaceful sleep of Ingol and the great bear beside him, even though they were treading on the richest gold. Lorraine said he respected Ingol Arnarsson, and the sailors respected their captains, and they also held deep reverence for these predecessors who roamed the seas. Picking up treasure was their right as adventurers, but not disturbing the rest of the dead was their duty as sailors. The cave was filled with a pungent aroma of harvest, the smell of kerosene. Lorraine and his sailors stood at the cave entrance, avoiding the strange smell, watching the sailors busy on the sand dunes with a smile. Noah casually played with a gold bracelet, his face wrinkled. Captain, I can't understand. What don't you understand? If this cave is a tomb built by Ingol Arnarsson, why are there only 5 people in the bear? Did they build the tomb themselves? Even if the cave is natural, so much sand, and so many gold objects, and that harpoon cannon, how many trips do they have to move at all? The warriors in the silver helmets are not coolies, they are the glorious Viking guards, Lorraine explained with a smile. Every guard is a slave owner, and Ingol is the biggest slave owner. There must have been hundreds of slaves who built the tomb back then. If he wanted to build Newton, he couldn't have used only one longship. Where are the other ships? After so many years, they probably sank. Only Ingol's flagship was dragged onto the reef, so it survived. Then where did all the slaves go? This, Noah said seriously. Captain, slave traders like to capture wandering Roma. I heard from the old people of the Sarah tribe that once the Roma are captured, they are no longer human beings, but the property of the slave owners. She waved her arms, as if she couldn't find the right words for a moment. Slave owners will not allow their property to leave. Even if they die, they will first execute their slaves, or leave the slaves as inheritance to their descendants. Isn't this the tradition of the Vikings? Almost. If it's almost, why are there no slave burial pits here? Are they all buried in the sand dunes? Sand dunes. Lorraine subconsciously looked at the sand dunes, and in a trance, he seemed to see the soft silver sand move. He was stunned for a moment, rubbed his eyes and was about to take a closer look. Just at this moment, the sand dune suddenly collapsed. The sand dune collapsed, and the location was right below the 2 sailors who were picking up gold. The sailor screamed and fell into the sand cave, and soon flew out like a baseball, hitting the dome of the cave with a bang. His brain splattered, and blood rained down. Huge waves surged in the tranquil sand dunes. A pure black tail swung out from the white sand, and with a fierce lash, it smashed Inger and his loyal guards to pieces. The harpoon cannon under Inger's feet flew like a cannonball, heading straight for the cave entrance, knocking away 3 sailors who were unable to escape along the way. Lorraine swooped over and knocked the stunned Noah and Atrin to the ground. The harpoon cannon flew over their heads and hit the 4-pound cannon on the gun carriage. With a bang, it flew to the left and right. The huge anaconda slowly raised its head from the sand dunes. More than 10 meters long and nearly 1 meter thick, the soft and dry sand slid down its dark body, leaving not a speck of dust on it. The panicked sailors rushed to the cave entrance like crazy. Lorraine slowly stood up and stood against a flow of people with henna at the cave entrance. The giant python coiled in the courtyard. Jumungandr. Gator. Chapter 70 Jumungandr. It felt like a real-life anaconda. Golden artifacts scattered across the flawless white sand, and an enormous black snake slowly emerged from the center of the dune. It spitted its tongue, slowly pulling itself out of the dune, bit by bit. With each inch it emerged, the dune sank a little deeper. The dry, soft dune, already tangled from the sailors climbing, was now ravaged by the giant snake, collapsing and crushing. Fine, white sand poured down into the stone troughs on the walls, the entire cavern utterly transformed, a mass of shifting sand and undulating valleys. It swam unnoticed until it completely emerged from the sand, coiled in the center, and raised its head. Hiss, it roared to the sky. With a roar, the enormous anaconda lunged forward, lunging at a fleeing sailor with a speed belying its size. In a split second, its body straightened, its advance as lightning fast. Its mouth gaped. The upper and lower jaws opened at a 180-degree angle, revealing the fangs and the dark throat within. It faced its target, spitting out a fishy gust of air. Anacondas are clearly non-venomous. But the fleeting smell of the fishy air was enough to intoxicate the fleeing sailor. His legs gave way and he tumbled out. When he got back up, the snake's jaws were right in front of him. Even if he wanted to flee, he couldn't find a way out. Emily, clang. Lorraine rushed over like a sledgehammer, both blades raised to his shoulders. With a thud, he sliced the snake's skin, thrusting his jaws, as tall as a man, a meter sideways, and crashing into the cave wall, brushing past the sailor. Dust filled the air. Lorraine stood firmly in front of the sailor, panting, "I say, who is Emilia?" "She is, my love, Captain. She is a cook for Lord Sheffield in Liverpool. We agreed that when we return from this voyage, we will hold a wedding in our hometown, then we can't just die casually." Lorraine opened his horse stance, slowly raised his two swords, and slung them on his back. A person may have many weddings in his life, but the first one is always the most unforgettable life experience. "Yes, Captain." The sailor was so moved that his legs trembled. "Although I am about to marry Emilia, every time I call her name, I can't help but recall the first wedding with my cousin Salem. I was so green back then." "Huh? Are you getting married for the second time?" Hiss. The topic of marriage has not been discussed in detail, and the big snake with an injured cheek swung its head while roaring, sweeping over like a huge horizontal bar. Lorraine kicked the sailor away and chopped with the gritted teeth. The sharp blade pierced the snake's skin once again with a thud, sending him flying backwards. With two loud thuds, he shattered the two remaining sandbags. White sands flew everywhere. It splashed onto the ceiling, scattered across the ground, and obscured half the cave in a hazy haze, leaving only the remarried sailor and the giant snake staring at each other. The sailor swallowed miserably. "Cousin Say. Saren, I was wrong. I shouldn't have had an affair with Emilia in the Koshi that day." He cried out his repentance to the unknown god, and God responded to his confession with swiftness. The white sand hadn't yet settled, and the giant python hadn't yet struck. 7 or 8 silver tarot cards shot out from the curtain of dust, swirling and hiding the snake's tough skin before gliding away with a clang. Hannah, clad in her battle uniform, leaped out of the sand curtain on all fours, swirling and slinging a rope, wrapping it around the snake's raised neck like a lasso. The giant snake's tail swooped down with a whistling sound. Hannah, hanging on the rope, was in midair. Seeing no escape, she pursed her lips and drew her dagger. At that moment, Lorraine suddenly emerged from the sand, springing up from the ground like a spring, blades pointed forward, arms extended, and with a fierce thrust, he thrust both blades down. With a mighty blow, he thrust his blades, unsuitable for a direct thrust, half an inch into the snake's tail. He pressed the tail down from above, preventing it from rising as high as it would have, forcing it to carry him with him, sweeping past Hannah's feet with all its might, crashing straight into the cave wall. Bang! Lorraine slammed hard against the stone wall, vomiting blood with a gasp. The wall behind him cracked, a spiderweb-like pattern forming, zigzagging and snaking far away. Hannah remained in midair. Seeing Lorraine had the rope pinned down, she swung back, tightening the rope. She used the rope as a spring, swinging her body through a half-circle like a nimble monkey, looping back and landing on the snake's neck. Noya unleashed another round of silver taros. 7 or 8 silver flakes danced in midair, flitting like butterflies towards the snake's eyes. The snake's eyes, as big as balls, were impervious to blinking, making it impossible for the shot to miss. But the silver taros, striking the snake, failed to penetrate its transparent irises. Just as they had struck the snake's scales before, they slid away with a sizzling sound. This harmless attack, however, caused the snake to feel pain. It raised its head, but Henna's halberds and reins held it in place, preventing it from moving freely. It lashed its tail, but Lorraine, blood still oozing from the corners of her mouth, pulled with all her might, preventing the snake from achieving its goal. A moment's stalemate between the two, the snake and itself, ended, the snake helplessly watching as Noya drove the philandering sailor into the cave. This was the last sailor still trapped. Lorraine's face flushed crimson from the exertion, and veins throbbed on the back of his hands. Atron. Fire. Atron sat stunned on the ground, a 4-pounder tumbling down beside him. Hearing Lorraine's shrill cry, his body trembled violently. Are you mad? The cannon will collapse the cave, you think? The giant snake suddenly raised its tail. This behemoth, over 10 meters long, was already far more powerful than Lorraine. Previously, the two had been in a horizontal stalemate, and Lorraine had relied solely on his brute strength to hold out. Now, with a sudden change of direction, Lorraine was powerless. In a moment of dizziness, he was flung through the air by the snake. Head down, feet up. He fiercely drew his 2 swords and tried to strike back mid-air, but the snake beat him to the punch with a second blow. This time to the head. The snake released its long tail, swung it sideways, and dragged Sona, who was holding onto Sona, up like a centrifugal ball. The snake opened its jaws and bit into the defenseless Lorraine. Is there no escape? In a flash, Henna flipped over, letting go and stepping onto the taut rope. Using this tiny, almost unreliable force, she leaped into flight. With a few long strides, she leaped onto the snake's head, then leaped over its jaws. Her toes touching the python's lips. Suddenly accelerating, she grabbed Lorraine's waist before the snake could bite her. The two drifted sideways, landing on the ground. The anaconda's full strength attack slammed into the air, crashing into the cave wall like a derailed train. Boom! Stone chips flew, and the cave shook. Lorraine, holding Henna firmly on solid ground, turned and roared at Acheron. You think this cave won't collapse without the cannons? Fire, crackling. The spiderweb-like cracks widened, connecting into patches and gathering into folds. By the light of the torches on the cave wall, even Acheron, standing far away, could clearly see the growing cracks. He knew Lorraine hadn't lied. His face was filled with fear and hesitation, between seeking death and waiting for death. Finally, with a trembling voice, he bit his lip and cried out in a sobbing voice, "Equip the gun. Quick, set the gun." The sailors in the gun crew woke up as if from a dream, and hurriedly lifted the gun back onto the gun carriage, loaded the powder, and loaded the ammunition. Lorraine watched the anaconda turn around. It slowly turned around, spitting out its tongue, and coiled up. Lorraine and Henna looked at each other, shoulder to shoulder, raised their swords high, swung their sharp edges, and faced the powerful enemy. He took a deep breath. Noah, take the sailors who have nothing to do and run, the farther, the better. Chapter 71 Collapse. The snake climbed higher. Lorraine never understood the muscular patterns of snakes. Just like the one before him, a moment ago coiled and had held high, suddenly, its triangular head, as if pulled by some force, soared higher, tracing a parabola, jaws wide open, swooping down towards Lorraine and Henna with the force of thunder. Lorraine and Henna leaped to either side. They both leaped, darting towards the snake's tail. The snake's trunk slammed heavily into the sand, its tail whipping towards Lorraine. Lorraine abruptly stopped and held his knife. He knelt on one knee, his left knife held horizontally, the flat of its back against his right arm, and his right knife held straight down, the tip resting on the ground, the blade facing the snake. The powerful tail whipped up, lashing out, slapping the knife holder with a bang, blood splattering, and the snake's skin ripping apart. Lorraine was sent flying backwards, slamming into the cave wall with a thud. Crumbs of rock rustled, and the spiderweb on the wall widened. But the snake had only one tail. The serpent's tail swept towards Lorraine, and Henna, on the other side, seized the opportunity to leap. She leaped onto the snake like a cat, thrusting her 2 short blades high and stabbing. With a thud, they pierced through the scales and slid out diagonally along the blades. 2 streams of blood shot upward. The serpent, in pain, whipped Lorraine away with its tail, then raised its head, bent down its torso, and bit Henna. Lorraine had unknowingly lunged back, extending both blades to their full extent, slashing through the serpent's snow-white belly. A sudden sound of ripping leather echoed through the cave. The serpent suffered its greatest damage since the beginning of the battle, 2 streams of glistening flesh piercing its belly. It raised its head and roared in pain. The serpent was an anaconda. Its size and strength were its strengths, but its lack of venom and claws were its unforgiving drawbacks. Its attack methods were limited: ramming, biting, whipping, and strangling. Against a cave full of prey and clumsy sailors, it was unstoppable. But with only Lorraine and Henna to fend for it, its reckless actions were limited. But its sheer size was a factor. Working together, Lorraine and Henna could easily withstand its powerful attacks, yet they were equally powerless against its tough scales and muscles. Slashes and thrusts, after each piercing of its skin, were already utterly useless. Their hopes of a quick victory on their own were utterly unrealistic. This was a fragile secret cave, vulnerable to collapse at any moment. No one knew the conditions outside, but they could only guess that it might be bathed in a perfectly warm hot spring. The cave was warm, yet not as scorching as the heat of prolonged contact with lava or boiling water. As long as he wouldn't die from contact with water, Lorraine wasn't worried about the cave collapsing. He was only concerned about it being knocked down by the mighty snake. Snakes are water-loving creatures. If it collapsed and fell into the water, even he wouldn't be able to defeat the swift snake, let alone survive. They needed to fight, they needed to win, and they needed to end it quickly. A slender 4-pounder silently poked its head out of the tunnel. Atron's voice, hoarse and erratic, he called out at the top of his lungs, "Fire!" The words reached Lorraine and Henna, who immediately abandoned their snakes and fled. One to the left and the other to the right, toward the cave walls. The enraged serpent chased Lorraine with its head and Henna with its tail, unconsciously stretching itself horizontally and elongating, exposing its massive body to the full range of the shotgun shells. Boom! The cannon roared, hundreds of pellets raining down with a resounding roar, nearly half of them colliding with a giant snake. The serpent flew backward, slamming into the sand, half its body shattered like leather, blood and flesh flying everywhere. The unstoppable sound echoed through the cave, its surging momentum resembling a dilapidated house. Dust from the dome filled the air, nearly obscuring vision. Lorraine saw the snake still trying to raise its head, its mouth wide open, clinging to the wall. Fighting the urge to vomit, he shouted, "Atron, continue, 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 continue." Atron's face paled to a bloodless white, his jaws chattering as his neck trembled. He kicked the sailor beside him. "Didn't you hear what the captain said? Raise the barrel 2 degrees, reload." The gun crew hurried off. While they were reloading, Lorraine, staggering from the shock, struggled back to the tunnel, holding on to Henna, who was even weaker than him, and retreated to directly behind the guns. The broken snake, its tongue spitting out, began to swim slowly, softly and slowly. Its bright red blood flowed through its rotten flesh, leaving brown spots on the sand. It swam towards the tunnel. The gun crew's movements grew more urgent. A sailor stood behind Atron, constantly announcing the snake's distance. 30 meters, 25 meters, 20 meters, 10 meters, 9 meters, over, fire. This time, Lorraine didn't need to urge him. The snake had already opened its maw. Atron, his face pale, lit the trigger. In an instant, the raised barrel roared again. The roar shook the severely injured snake to its knees. The snake collapsed to the sand with a thud, and all the bullets grazed its body and hit the cave wall. Crack! Crack! Lorraine and Atron looked at each other in surprise. 10 meters, Luigi, you can miss. Well, life, even the most experienced gentleman can fail in love. Crack! Crack! Henna, with her sharp eyes, was the first to notice water seeping from both sides of the crack. The water stains expanded, and soon the cave began to drip. Atron swallowed. "Captain, how about another shot?" "What the hell?" "Run!" Boom! The cave wall collapsed. Lorraine, Henna, Atron, and 6 sailors from the gun crew raced desperately through the pitch-black tunnel, steaming waves surging behind them, the stench of sulfur filling their chests. One sailor stumbled, screaming as he was swept under. No one could stop to save him, for the waves outran them. Soon after him, the massive wave swept over everyone, sweeping them into the turbulent current. Lorraine, The moment the wave engulfed him, grabbed Hannah. Their speed was even faster than their flight, their feet off the ground, careening forward. Their torches went out the moment they hit the water, leaving only endless darkness and an endless future. Lorraine held Hannah in his arms with all his might. Hannah, like a docile kitten, held her breath and curled up. Bang! Lorraine's back slammed hard against the rock wall. The excruciating pain forced him to open his mouth, releasing a stream of bubbles. But he was caught in the turbulent current, powerless to struggle. He could only bounce with the waves. Bracing himself for the next, heavier, more sudden impact. Bang! He began to suffocate, his consciousness fading. Within his hazy consciousness, something stirred in his arms, soft and delicate, covering his lips. Sweet air flowed from the void into his hardened lungs. Lorraine's spirit suddenly shook. Light. Splash. A huge wave crashed against the ground, and he and Hannah were thrown out of the water, landing in a small, luminous cave. He saw Noya standing in the cave, rushing to help, and saw the sailors of the expedition team jubilantly high-fiving each other. Then, Atrin and the sailors of the gun crew were also thrown out by the waves, one by one hitting the ground, unconscious. Lorraine let Noya help him to his feet, and laughed weakly. Save them. Don't let the heroic gunners drown. Splash. A massive splash erupted as the waves crashed into the cave. A massive, wounded, and dying snake emerged from the waves, like a dragon emerging from the abyss, its jaws wide open, biting into the empty space. Its maw was barely a meter from Lorraine's, its dark, lidless eyes meeting his own. It flicked its tongue, its long, broken body slowly retreating, submerged in the water. Soon, only a faint trail of blood remained, swirling with the turbid waves and crashing against the shore. This sudden and terrifying scene left everyone frozen in place, unable to move. Lorraine coughed twice. Where's the snake in this cave? Not long ago, it suddenly fled toward the exit, leaving the entire fluorescent cave open. Otherwise, we wouldn't have dared enter. It seems they still have some integrity. Unlike Jörmungandr, they're not even afraid of sulfur. Lorraine smiled wryly and shook his head. It won't come. Save them. Any later, and our gunners will have drowned on land. Chapter 72 Narwhal. The expedition to the sea cave was over. Though the process had been somewhat tortuous, thanks to Noya's calm retreat of most of the sailors, they not only avoided a complete loss but, on the contrary, made a substantial profit. After a public weighing, the expedition team recovered a full crate of 94 gold artifacts and nearly 200 ancient gold coins, totaling 64.52 kilograms, equivalent to 8,814 pounds. According to the previous contract, Lorraine generously priced this haul at 10,000 pounds, prompting a wave of celebration on board. It was a gesture of return. During the retreat, the leading group of sailors experienced something deeply moving. When the cave collapsed, the coral snakes abandoned the fluorescent cave, and everyone knew the battlefield had changed drastically. They were grateful for Lorraine's courage in remaining behind. Surprisingly, the first thing they salvaged was not the gold, but the strange ballista that they considered a symbol of their captain, the one that Inger had stepped on beneath his throne. During their retreat, they also took with them this ancient ship's armor, weighing over half a ton, seemingly worthless, with no one even sure if it was still usable. It was precisely because of this antique that they missed the opportunity to transport the gold. Of 2 boxes and a barrel full of gold artifacts, they only managed to grab one. The rest were swallowed by the incoming waves, drowning in the deep, snake-infested hot springs, threatening the very existence of a dangerous cave. This heavy debt was enough to motivate Lorraine to offer a larger share of the profits. Review and summary. A total of 125 sailors accepted the profit-sharing agreement during the 2 sea cave expeditions, with 33 participating. 15 died and 4 were injured. The losses were immense, but the gains were also substantial. The spoils included the macaw, valued at 3,000 British pounds, ancient gold artifacts, valued at 10,000 British pounds, an ancient ballista, yet to be verified by Kren, and a monitor lizard skin, yet to be crafted into equipment, for which no valuation was given. This total profit share reached 13,000 British pounds. According to the previous agreement, each sailor who signed the contract could get 20 pounds and 16 shillings, which was a free ride. The sailors who participated in the adventure received an additional 78 pounds and 15 shillings, which was the profit of the adventure. There was also a pension. The pension for each person who died in the expedition was £81 and 3 shillings, and the consolation pension for the injured was £20 and 10 shillings. All the dividends were here, and the living could get up to £140, which was a kind of overnight wealth. Noah and Pierce issued a payout slip to each sailor, and once they returned to Southampton, they could pay it at any time with a receipt from the Chamber of Commerce. As for the deceased, their wealth and belongings would be sent by the Chamber of Commerce to their testators, and they would express their condolences in regards to the other party. This was the obligation of the employer. How much did Lorraine gain from this expedition? A route to the New World, a brig-class frigate ready for commercial use after repair, and ancient gold artifacts worth an unknown £8,800. Even at a 1:50 ratio, the value of the gold artifacts reached £440,000. Of course, the actual profit could not be calculated this way. Scarcity makes things valuable. The market for collecting ancient gold artifacts is limited. If these artifacts were released en masse into the market, they would quickly become worthless. This process of cashing out could take 10 years or even longer. During this time, many of these artifacts might be given as gifts by Lorraine in exchange for opportunities, reducing the actual cash profit by half or even 70%. At 70% off, that's £130,000, still a highly profitable business. This money would serve as the starting capital for the Drake merchants' rise to prominence, the most precious gift left to Lorraine by his ancestors on this mysterious and legendary island. After a 3-day rest, Lorraine, filled with gratitude, led his crew back to the longship ruins and glued his hand-carved Viking oars to the longship's mast. On the oars were written in Old Icelandic, "The ancestor of whalers, the Wolf King, Ingol Arnarsson, rests here, his treasure lies in the Noten in the sea cave. If you want it, please sacrifice your life on the altar." Crone looked at the direction of the sea cave unwillingly. "Captain, tens of thousands of pounds of gold. The big snake was seriously injured and may have been poisoned to death by sulfur. Don't you consider sending a few people to explore in the water? Too much is as bad as too little." Lorraine whispered a sentence in Chinese. Crone was stunned for a moment. "What did you say?" "This is an ancient Eastern proverb, which means that when faced with wealth, one should rationally obey the Lord's arrangements and not let greed blind your eyes. That ancient Oriental man must have seen gold artifacts worth tens of thousands of pounds and thousands of years of history. Isn't that great? Jormungandr guards endless treasures, and the souls of pirates are hidden deep under the water. This is like the true legend of Noten. The great whaler deserves such a destination. Ingol Arnarsson deserves such a destination." Lorraine smiled faintly. "By the way, what about that ancient ballista? Miraculous." Lorraine raised his eyebrows with interest. "From your tone, it sounds like it can really be used. More than that." Crone waved his arms excitedly. "Do you know? It should be made of the ribs of some kind of whale, with fine threads carved on it. It is impregnated and infiltrated with molten metal through a special process to change the material properties. This is a top alchemy technique." "Alchemy? It's the lost alchemy." Kren gasped heavily. "This skill makes the crossbow immortal for thousands of years, and its hardness and toughness are extraordinary. I heard that it was knocked away by a giant snake and hid a 4-pound cannon, but there was no trace of collision at all. I have tested the tension of the crossbow arm. As long as the right string is installed, it can be shot stably for 300 meters, an amazing distance. Immortality, toughness, and alchemy." Lorraine frowned and tried to understand for a long time, and decided to regard this ancient weapon as some kind of memory metal formed by chance. "Anyway, the arrows it shoots are still the same, and the general meaning is almost the same." He nodded and asked, "What's it called?" "I found its inscription on the crossbow arm, Hermes Trismegistus, Narwhal." "Narwhal?" Lorraine felt that he liked the name. "Can you install it on the bow of the ship like Scott's ballista?" "Not now, but when I return to Southampton, I can build a brand new launch platform for the Narwhal. Exactly the same as the previous Scott's ballista, or even better. I leave it to you, my master craftsman." Lorraine stretched excitedly. "Speed up the repair of the ship." Nasperth's diary mentioned that there is a tortuous but wide safe route in the reef belt in the northwest of the island. It was by this route that he passed through the fog area twice. Really, everyone became excited. "Indeed," Lorraine confirmed with a smile. "In the next 2 days, Atrin and I will find it and mark it." We entered the fog from the northeast. Even if the reindeer was still waiting for us in the seas outside the fog, they wouldn't expect us to emerge from the northwest, through the fog, heading straight north. We'll return to England via the high latitudes. No one will be able to find us on the vast ocean. Gentlemen and ladies, be proud as can be, he declared, looking at his sailors from the longship like a proud judge. We have established a route, landed on the island, traversed the jungle, explored the unknown. We have conquered Heron Island, completely, conquered it, hooray! P.S. Hermes Trismegistus, the ancient Greeks combined the Greek god Hermes and the Egyptian god Thoth. His name means triple Hermes. He is the legendary inventor of alchemy and is considered the ancestor of alchemy, and from this he gave birth to Hermeticism. PS2. Before World War II, a gold pound contained approximately 7.32 grams of gold. Chapter 73 Zheng Drake. Plymouth, Devonport, Royal Navy Administration Building. The Administration Building serves as the Channel Fleet's land-based offices and command post. A large Georgian-style building with white walls and blue roofs, its rows of symmetrical, bright windows evoke a tranquil atmosphere. On the west side of the third floor lies the office of Royal Navy Captain Sir Francis Drake, the current head of the Drake family and the new captain of HMS Lion. He sits at his desk, expressionless, listening to his helmsman, Belgiodia, report on his work. On October 4, the First Fleet of the Drake Chamber of Commerce launched a privateering attack on a transfer ship under the Folk-Anjou Chamber of Commerce of the Kingdom of France in the Cantabrian waters, west of the island of Yaux. They captured one and sank one. The news has been confirmed. While cleaning up the battlefield, they were intercepted by the French Dessay Chamber of Commerce destroyer Reindeer. The Iris fought back, but the cat's tail escaped. The news has been confirmed. On October 9, the Reindeer returned to port in La Rochelle. Varon Dessay claimed that the Iris was sunk on the western edge of the Celtic Sea and all the crew members on board survived. The news has not been confirmed, but Bell glanced at his boss cautiously. The two sides fought on the 4th, the Reindeer returned to port on the 9th, and today is the 22nd. Ramos Pittick confirmed that the cat's tail was hit by at least 3 shells when it fled west. Classmate Drake has not appeared yet. It is very likely. Varon Dessay, who is that? Zhang suddenly asked. Report to the captain. Willem Dessay is the vice president of the French Dessay Chamber of Commerce, the admiral of the First Fleet, and the captain of the Reindeer. He claimed to have sunk my stupid brother. Yes, yes. Zhang's face showed no joy or anger. He took out a document from the desk and flipped through it for a while. In 3 days, the Lion will have a cruise mission. Our target is the North Sea, and the Spartan Guard's cruise area is in the Celtic Sea. Please make an appointment with Colonel Bro for me. I want to have afternoon tea with him. Bell blinked. Captain, the commander asked us to restrain ourselves and not take the initiative to provoke war with France. The Lion will never go against the headquarters' opinions. Zhang played with his fingers, but you have to know that the Lion was formed not long ago. I only brought a few officers, including you, who originally belonged to the Wandering. New teams always have a running-in period. Deviating from the route is an acceptable accident. If we happen to wipe out a few arrogant pirates in this accident, it should be regarded as a pleasant surprise. Your opinions are always pertinent. Bell shrugged helplessly. Captain, you know that when I was studying under Sir Leighton, Drake and I were rare friends. I want to ask a question on his behalf. Why did you kick him out of the house? Yes. Zhang was silent for a while, opened the window, and looked at Devon Harbor in the distance. I'm not a father. Baker frowned when he heard such an opening remark. My father has made outstanding military achievements, has a great reputation, and is deeply trusted by His Majesty. The entire aristocratic circle in England knows that he will become the Secretary of the Navy one day, and perhaps even the Prime Minister. So he has the ability to protect Lorraine and that disgusting woman, but I can't. Zhang laughed at himself. I'm just an incompetent man who is under the influence of my father. When I was in the Naval Academy, I even killed the heir of a noble family in a duel. It was only thanks to my father's reputation that I was able to barely stay in the army and become a tool for His Majesty to make up for his debt to my father. I can't protect Lorraine. He is proud, and he doesn't need to endure the cold eyes and ridicule of the nobles because of this useless brother. I can give him what he wants, including letters of marque and self-esteem. Bell didn't understand Zhang's thoughts at all. If you have this idea, you can explain it to classmate Drake. Why? Zhang suddenly interrupted, his eyes burning. Lorraine is my brother, and it was that disgusting pagan woman who prevented him from becoming a perfect aristocrat. I hate her. Mrs. Arneson. Before I went to see Lorraine, I went to see her tombstone. If I still felt some guilt before, it was gone after seeing that epitaph. Shaq's voice was cold, which made people shudder. It was she who led Lorraine to betray God. In order to punish her, I can lose everything. Go and invite Colonel Bro. I hope to meet him as soon as possible this time. Bell knew that the conversation was over. He sighed and saluted with his legs. Yes, Captain. He was about to carry out Shaq's order when the door of the office was suddenly pushed open from the outside. Captain, Portsair, Sergeant Armani, what are your rules? Shaq stood up straight, looking at the sailor who had just entered with dissatisfaction. Go out and report again. Yes, the sailor saluted hurriedly and left. After a while, the door of the office was gently knocked. Report. Sergeant Mainmast Sails Captain D. Armani wants to see you. Come in. Sergeant Armani, who had adjusted his clothes, walked in briskly, saluted Shaq first, then turned around and saluted Bell solemnly. Captain, Lieutenant, the scout stationed in Sailport reported that at 10:12 this morning, a fleet consisting of a brigantine and a brig entered the Bahia dock in Sailport. It has been confirmed that the two escort vessels are armed merchant ships of the Drake Chamber of Commerce, namely the Butterfly and the Macaw. The president of the Chamber of Commerce, Mr. Lorraine Andrew Drake, is safe. It has been confirmed. Have you gone up to ask? Shaq's face showed no joy, as if his attention was not on the point at all. Bell smiled bitterly and coughed twice. Captain, when you asked me to arrange someone to look after the civil port, I chose the old men of the Wandering. They all know the importance of it. Shaq breathed a sigh of relief. He sat back in his seat and said solemnly, Sergeant Armani, we are about to be transferred to the New World. The training on the ship has been relaxed in the past few days. Notify all sailors on the shore that they must assemble on board in 2 days. All leave will be cancelled. 2 days later. Sergeant Armani understood and stood at attention excitedly. Yes, sir. Your order will be conveyed to every sailor's ears. Go ahead. Yes, sir. Sergeant Armani stepped back. Bell squinted his eyes and secretly made a weird face. Captain, your afternoon tea with Colonel Bro, Captain Judia. Shaq slowly sorted out the documents on the table and took out a nautical chart. I'm very busy. I haven't had afternoon tea for many days, and I don't plan to waste this precious time to familiarize myself with the nautical charts of the new defense zone in the short term. Bell looked as if it was just as he expected, and pursed his lips. I see. By the way, I heard that your sister went to church school. Is your family short of money? You plan to sponsor me. There's a batch of muskets at the quartermaster's office, about 40 of them. Because the Lion is about to be redeployed, they haven't been counted yet. Those unscrupulous privateers will probably offer a good price for them. Are you worried? Lorraine has never been able to handle a loss, and he has a very bad temper. This time, with that, Shaq frowned. Bell quickly whispered, Virindise, Virindise. Shaq nodded. He suffered a great loss at Virindise's hands, and he won't let it go. That destroyer is already his prey, and he has no other choice but to board it. Bell raised an eyebrow. Understood. I'll sell the muskets for a good price. I won't let my sister suffer. Soul-searching questions from Monday, Q1. Did you see that fat guy rolling around with his keyboard? Q2. Do you dislike him? Q3. Have you tried to vote on him with recommendations? Q4. Did you hit him? Chapter 74. The storm is over. After emerging from the foggy sea of Hibashi Island, Lorraine ceaselessly pondered his next steps. He had 4 priorities. The first was the overhaul of the Iris and Macaw. The Macaw needed to have all its ironwork and sails replaced, focusing on the rivets on the hull and deck, which would require dismantling the entire ship. Replacing non-reusable materials and then reassembling them would be a massive undertaking. The Iris was in better condition, but still needed about a third of its hull and a small portion of its planking replaced, and its keel and ribs also underwent a thorough overhaul. Considering quality, quantity, speed, and efficiency, Crone rejected the 7 private shipyards in Southampton and directly recommended the renowned Bahia dockyard in Sailport to Lorraine. The master carpenter there had served as an apprentice alongside Crone at the Devonport dockyard. Although they didn't share the same master, they shared bunk beds. Crone praised the other party's character and craftsmanship endlessly, and assured Lorraine that if Lorraine chose the Bahia shipyard, the repairs for the Iris could be completed within 10 days, and the Macaw within 40. This time was only half of Crone's original estimate. The second issue is the situation at the Chamber of Commerce. During the trip to Hibashi, the Iris had been missing from view for nearly 20 days, its fate unknown. As the Chamber of Commerce's absolute controlling shareholder, Lorraine was well aware of the turmoil his disappearance would cause. It would alienate people. The Drake Chamber of Commerce, after all, had a short history and lacked a solid foundation. Currently, trade licenses, shipping routes, and the majority of the Chamber of Commerce's shipping capacity were controlled by the three senior executives of the Northwest European branch. Ramos, Eddie, and Carmen were the representatives of the Chamber of Commerce's three partner families. If his partners became greedy and took advantage of the chaos, his Chamber of Commerce would likely be divided or even split. Either scenario would be a devastating blow to the Chamber of Commerce. Even if Lorraine could generate endless cash, it would take at least 6 months to restore its former glory. Returning to Southampton to reassure the people was urgent. Furthermore, there was the disposal of the gold and the subsequent response to the Cantabrian conflict. While these were equally vital matters of life and death and profit, considering them before the Chamber of Commerce's future was uncertain was inappropriate. Where should the Butterfly and the Macaw be sent? Plymouth? Or Southampton? Lorraine ultimately decided to accept Cren's suggestion and sail the fleet to the Bahia dockyard in Sail Harbor, Plymouth. Cren and Atrin would remain there to handle the aftermath, while he, Pierce, Henna, and Noah would travel overland to Southampton, splitting their forces to maximize time. On the morning of October 22, the Butterfly entered Sail Harbor. Lorraine, donning a tuxedo, stood before the rented carriage, an umbrella in one hand and a suitcase in the other. Behind them, Henna and the other two, also dressed in formal attire, bid farewell to Karen and Atrin, who remained behind. If all goes well, Henna will promptly relay the news and follow up arrangements to you. If anything goes wrong, Lorraine frowned and shook his head. That's my responsibility. Just fix the boat. Karen will handle the Plymouth issue. Don't worry about the money, I'll take care of it. Karen and Atrin nodded solemnly. After the two said their goodbyes, Lorraine and the other three boarded the carriage. The waiting coachman tried to take the suitcase from Lorraine. Lorraine gently lifted the box and politely stepped aside, nodding to the coachman. These are relics of our ancestors. It's the duty of the younger generation to take care of them firsthand. Thank you, you're welcome, sir. The carriage slowly pulled away. Atrin watched it disappear around the corner of the dock. Concerned, he asked, Cren, do you think the captain will be alright? That's not something we should be concerned about. Cren glanced at Atrin distantly. Let's rent 2 good rooms nearby. The gold will be with me until the captain returns. After a night of rapid travel, the carriage finally stopped on Herbert Walker Street, in front of the small red brick building belonging to the Drake Chamber of Commerce. Greeted by Miss Jenna, Lorraine entered the lobby and was surprised to see Ramos and Carmen sitting stiffly opposite each other over morning tea. My vice admiral and head of business are sitting quietly at the Chamber of Commerce, having morning tea. Is business really slow these days? Clang. Carmen's spoon rudely slammed down on the bone china plate in front of her. President, you're finally back. Through Ramos and Carmen's words, Lorraine finally grasped the situation. As he'd predicted, the Chamber of Commerce had been in a state of panic these past few days, nearly scattering. All the glory belonged to Villain Dessaix, far away in the French port of La Rochelle. He had made a high-profile return to France 14 days prior, on October 9, and had since been proclaiming on every occasion that he had sunk the Papillon, killing everyone aboard. For him, fabricating such a lie might have been merely a means of prestige and dignity, but for the Drake Chamber of Commerce, which had lost its president, the lie nearly led to disaster. The first to incite the conflict was Viscount Alfonso. He proposed that, with the simultaneous death of 2 shareholders and the lack of any heirs, the Chamber of Commerce should be dissolved. The independent Northwest European branch could be jointly controlled by the 3 shareholder executives, or split into 3 semi-independent cooperative chambers, each with its own financial control but shared shipping capacity and distribution channels. This proposal was strongly opposed by Carmen and Ramos, who were in Bilbao at the time, and ultimately fell through. Carmen and Viscount Alfonso had a huge argument over this incident, severing their ties. Viscount Alfonso immediately replaced Carmen with a new spokesperson. Carmen resolutely returned the villa Viscount Alfonso had gifted her. That night, she and Ramos boarded the Cat's Tail, risking a trip across the Cantabrian route and returning to the Chamber of Commerce. Events proved their decision to be far-sighted. Viscount Alfonso began lobbying the other 2 partners. Councillor Piddock was almost persuaded, but it was Ramos' earnest letter that persuaded him to retract his motion. Things were also turbulent in Norway. But it wasn't Sir Carmen who wavered, but Eddie, who had been entrusted with a crucial task by Lorraine. He made a special trip to the Chamber of Commerce and spent an entire night in closed-door consultations with Ramos and Carmen, hoping to establish his own business with his second fleet. Ramos and he had a heated argument, and the matter ended unpleasantly. Eddie returned to Stavanger, resentful and angry. Since then, citing concern for Lorraine and his lack of interest in his work, he announced that the second fleet would be stationed in Stavanger and operations would be suspended. This was a tactical move, intended to force Ramos and Carmen to reopen negotiations and accept his demands. That was 6 days ago. Eddie's betrayal had devastated his two loyal partners, and just as they were at their wits' end, Lorraine returned. With Lorraine's return, Vellen's lies were exposed, the Chamber of Commerce's crisis resolved, and everything returned to normal. Hearing this, Lorraine smiled calmly. I didn't expect Mr. Eddie Garman to be so eager to negotiate. Then invite him over. I'd like to speak with him. Chapter 75 Gift, New Seafarer. 3 days later, Eddie entered the Chamber of Commerce, filled with trepidation. He expected a cold reception and a blunt dismissal, but nothing happened. Neither warm nor distant, Lorraine didn't even meet him individually. Instead, she took Pierce and 3 other executives directly to the office and launched the formal board meeting of the Northwest European chapter. While Mrs. Hannah was busy preparing materials for the meeting, Lorraine took them to the lounge for tea. Looking back, it was incredibly thrilling. Lorraine smiled as he recounted the chase with the Reindeer. We breached 4 watertight compartments, and the Reindeer burned its crucial stern sail. We were moving at similar speeds, one in pursuit, the other in flight, from the Cantabrian Sea to the western edge of the Celtic Sea. With nowhere else to go, we were cornered in a foggy area. Lorraine recounted the thrilling adventures, each one a breathtaking exclamation of surprise and a restless heart. Fortunately, there was much faith on board, and the gods were willing to look after us. Not only did we survive, but we also found the treasure of my ancestor, Ingel Arneson, and found a few small souvenirs. He clapped his hands, and Noah entered, carrying 3 small boxes to Lorraine. Lorraine opened one, took a look, and walked over to Ramos. Ramos Pittig, my friend. This is the Diradia, the golden sword of the Roman Praetorian Guard. Historically, it belonged only to the most respected friends of the emperor. The Praetorian Guard made the Roman Empire a lasting legend spanning Europe, Asia, and Africa. Ramos solemnly took it and pulled from the chest a broad, jewel-encrusted golden sword, half a wrist's length. The sword's name was the Diradia. In the 1st century BC, Octavian bestowed this sword upon his most trusted guard, establishing the Praetorian Guard, the most notorious force in Roman military history. People often only remember the Praetorian Guard's numerous assassination attempts after it became an independent political force, subconsciously overlooking their contributions to Rome. It was thanks to this powerful army, unwavering in its victories and defenders of the throne, that Rome, at its peak, became a great power that laid the foundation for European civilization. The most glorious symbol of this era is the Diradia, the golden sword bestowed by Octavian. Ramos glanced at Lorraine with gratitude. This golden sword was priceless, yet far more than that, for it represented trust. Lorraine smiled, patted his shoulder, then took up the second box, opened it, and handed it to Eddie. Eddie Garman, my friend. This golden ewer depicts the gathering of Octavian, Antony, and Lepidus. Their closeness made Rome strong, just like you and me. Eddie stared at the small golden ewer in the box, stunned. The ewer's age and value were no less than the golden sword Ramos had obtained, and its significance was no less. Octavian, Antony, and Lepidus were the all-powerful trio of post-Caesar Roman politics, inseparable and powerful. They laid the foundation for Octavian's establishment of the Principate, acting as the catalyst that destroyed the Republic. Octavian, on the ruins of the Republic, established a Roman Empire. The problem was, Octavian was able to establish the Roman Empire precisely because he parted ways with Antony and Lepidus, ultimately killing them. This friendship only made Octavian a success. The other two were reduced to dust. Trembling, Eddie retrieved the golden pot, cradling it in his arms. He muttered, "Thank you." Lorraine patted his shoulder as if he were patting Ramos. "I don't like Octavian's ending." "Not at all, I don't like it either." Eddie slowly sat down, unsure whether he disliked Antony's or Lepidus's. Lorraine lifted the last box and walked right up to Carmen before opening it. "Carmen Xavier, I suffered an accident, and you suffered the most. I have no way of repaying your loyalty and kindness." I only hope this set of gold jewelry will add to your glory. Lorraine pulled the ornate necklace from the box and personally placed it around Carmen's slender, white neck. Unfortunately, I don't know enough about beautiful jewelry, and it doesn't tell me what it's called. I only found a message on it, to Cleopatra VI, the last queen of the Ptolemaic dynasty and lover of both Caesar and Antony. Carmen touched the necklace on her chest in surprise, trying to discern the meaning of Lorraine's gift in her brown eyes. But she could see nothing. Lorraine asked her to sit down and said, "Freedom is a wonderful thing. You can seriously consider your future path. Whatever the outcome, please tell me, I want to get on the boat," Carmen said softly, blushing. "Come aboard," Carmen nodded. I know nothing about sea voyages. But you're a merchant and a noble, and you need someone skilled enough to accompany you on your voyages and manage your social interactions and relationships on land. These are exactly my strengths." Lorraine pondered for a moment. "Have you thought it through?" "Yes, I've been thinking about it for many days," Carmen said solemnly. "I'm tired of this land. Not only love, but even family and friendship are so fragile. After hearing about your adventures at sea, I finally know what I want, the strong bonds of a ship, like a cable. I have no regrets." Lorraine smiled sincerely. "I really need an excellent social advisor on my ship. Miss Carmen Xavier, you're accepted." With this gift as a prelude, the subsequent branch board meeting went exceptionally smoothly. To prevent a recurrence of this incident and for the future development of the Chamber of Commerce, Lorraine completely reorganized the branch's structure. Regarding equity, Carmen withdrew her shares and voluntarily transferred them all to Ramos, bringing the equity ratio between Ramos and Eddie to 2-1. Lorraine resigned his positions as branch president and admiral, with Ramos taking over as the absolute voice of the Northwest European branch. Eddie became vice president, no longer managing the fleet, but focusing on trade licensing and administrative matters at the various port exchanges. Knowing his actions had lost Lorraine's trust, Eddie reluctantly and gratefully accepted Lorraine's appointment. Regarding the fleet, Lorraine established a fleet directly under the General Chamber of Commerce, with himself as admiral, the flagship, the Butterfly, and subordinate ships, the Cattail and the Clover. The Northwest European branch retained only one trade fleet and the British Transit Fleet. The trade fleet's flagship was the Macaw, commanded by Admiral Ramos, and subordinate ships were 3 Kirk-class freighters, the Beverly Merchant, the Northern Knight, and the Carvel Drunkard. The transit fleet remained unchanged, with the flagship, the Siren, commanded by Admiral Carlo Merlin, and subordinate ships, the Mermaid, also a mixed-rigged schooner class. The title to the particularly significant Titus Beauty was returned to Pierce and placed in a dry dock rented by the Chamber of Commerce for maintenance, temporarily out of commission. After these basic operations were completed, Lorraine addressed several matters concerning the Chamber of Commerce, all of which involved spending money. First, raise £6,500 to pay sailors' adventure bonuses and arrange for a dedicated person to transfer the deceased's belongings and inheritance to their heirs. This matter was crucial to the Chamber of Commerce's reputation. Second, fully equip the Clover with firepower and raise funds to pay for the repairs to the Butterfly and Macaw. This matter was crucial to the Chamber of Commerce's combat power and shipping capacity. Third, Eddie was to oversee the liquidation negotiations with Viscount Alfonso, taking advantage of the temporary trade slump in Spain to repurchase the partners' shares at a reasonable price. Carmen was to be responsible for selecting new partners in Spain, with Ramos handling the detailed negotiations. Carmen, who had officially become Lorraine's advisor, said worriedly, "Captain, according to your request, the Chamber of Commerce needs to raise nearly £18,000 in cash within a month. Even if we deplete our reserves, we'll still be short by over £6,000. Should we wait a bit longer? Raising funds is your first task, Carmen." Lorraine nodded to Noah, who immediately entered carrying a large suitcase, placed it on the conference table, and opened it. It was filled to the brim with ancient gold artifacts. 8 gold objects, 60 coins, totaling £900. "Carmen, you're responsible for finding a suitable auction house for them. First, we need to disperse them, and second, we need to sell them in appropriate quantities. We need to sell these ancient gold objects without disrupting the collectibles market. This will raise sufficient funds for the Chamber of Commerce and prepare for the upcoming economic depression, which will last for an unknown period." Lorraine took a deep breath. "The Mindel Chamber of Commerce still owes me an invitation from the trade union. It's time to find some allies, and regain our ground." PS all 3 gold objects are artifacts from the Caesar-Octavian period, the transition period from the Roman Republic to the Roman Empire, from 48 BC, Cleopatra's engagement to Caesar, to 14 AD, Octavian's death. PS2. Gaius Octavius Augustus, September 23, 63 BC, August 19, 14 AD, originally named Gaius Octavius Tyrannus, was a member of the Second Triumvirate, the first head of the Roman Empire, and the founder of the Principate system, ruling Rome for 40 years. End of this chapter. Thank you so much for reading until the end. Don't forget to give it a like. Looking for more exclusive content and immediate access? Subscribe to our Patreon. Remember, every like, subscription or donation encourages us to continue. Thank you all. See you in the next video.